Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ace Attorney Character Popularity Poll. Today, we'll be going through nearly 400 unique Ace Attorney characters voted on by you, and see who ended up as the most popular. For a little background, two of my absolute favorite videos from the channel, Schaffrillas Productions, has got to be the ones where he catalogs the data from a big poll he held, where people would submit their 5 favorite Mario or Zelda characters, which, in turn, was inspired by Fither's Persona video of the same format. It's just such a fun time listening to him briefly discuss so many Mario and Zelda peeps from across the series, from the well-known faces of the franchise to the obscure Blorbos who appear in only a single side game. If you haven't seen them, I highly recommend it if you have the time to spare. I also blatantly copied the format of both of the polls themselves and the corresponding videos, so if you have seen them before, you'll have a good idea of how this will play out. So here we are with 3,173 submissions, making up over 15,240 individual votes for nearly 380 unique characters from across the series. It definitely doesn't compare with the numbers of the videos that inspired this one, but of course my online presence is definitely a lot smaller than the Funny Crabman's, with this being my first ever big YouTube project. And also Ace Attorney is definitely a much nicher series compared to that of Super Mario, so I'm pretty happy with what I was able to get. I got a pretty nice variety of submissions, with nearly every character who you're able to at least speak to and interact with in the games getting at least one vote, which made coming over the submissions pretty fun, with me going, oh yeah, that guy finally got a vote every time I saw someone new. But before we start, I'm going to issue a spoiler warning for all of the Ace Attorney games, except for the Professor Layton crossover. Discussing a lot of these characters and explaining why they're cool will unfortunately require spoiling aspects of the story. However, I've decided to exclude the crossover from this, since it's the only game that hasn't been ported to modern platforms yet, and is the one I assume that most people haven't played yet. So if you haven't, you will be safe from spoilers. Now, if you want to dodge spoilers, but still want to see the results, I will be posting a spreadsheet with the final results in the description of this video, so you can check it out there. To start things out, let's go over the rules of the poll in case you weren't there to vote on it yourself. Pretty much, if a character had made an appearance in a piece of official Ace Attorney media, they were eligible for this poll, which includes the main games, obviously, but also the anime, stage plays, audio dramas, manga, or anything else. I only drew the line at things that Ace Attorney characters appeared in that weren't Ace Attorney focused, like Marvel vs. Capcom 3 isn't going to count just because Phoenix was playable in it. I also considered allowing different depictions of characters to be their own slots on the list, like original trilogy Phoenix being separate from Apollo Justice Phoenix or College Age Phoenix, and told voters that they could vote that way if they wanted to. However, in the end, I decided not to go with this for the final tally, since it ended up with people being pretty particular about which versions of the characters they wanted to vote for. Like, I had some people voting for Edgeworth from specifically Investigations 2, or him from the original trilogy, but not Investigations games, or Ace Attorney 5 or 6, or him from just the first game. And in the end, I thought this would just end up cluttering the list too much, and I lumped them all together. So, I apologize for whoever voted for Marvin Grossberg from just the first game, but he'll have to rub elbows with the Trials and Tribulations version. Finally, there were plenty of jokesters who voted for characters that weren't valid, but if someone mostly voted for valid characters but threw in a joke vote or two at the end, I decided to let it slide and include them in the video, with them obviously not counting towards the official ranking. And so, with all that preamble out of the way, we can finally begin the ranking with the characters who received a single vote. Now, the pool of characters who are only voted for once is pretty large, so I'm not going to read off all of them myself, but I will make sure to have each one scroll by on screen while I discuss any that I found interesting. Here in the one vote category, we got a lot of the random victim characters who don't play any sort of role besides being the person who died, like Buddy Faith, Mackerel, Bastion Rook, and Constance Court. I'm honestly surprised a lot of these guys even got a vote, but that's one of the fun things about this poll. Even the most irrelevant or obscure characters are more than likely going to get something. In particular, I want to highlight Kashi Nu, who was the guy in Turnabout Ablaze who dressed up as Master Mask and got killed in the Alabastian Embassy. It's honestly so funny how irrelevant this plot point ends up being. Like, this man died, and it ultimately ends up being another mostly pointless detail to add onto the pile that the case already had. Oh yeah, and while he got a vote, Manny Cochin did not, despite being one of the most important characters in Investigation 1's plot. There were actually quite a few characters down here that surprised me with how few votes they got, like Frank Sawit and Pierce Dickety, who are the main killers of their respective cases, but I guess weren't super memorable characters, so I suppose I can see why they got so few votes. What genuinely shocked me was seeing that only one person voted for Seishiro Jigoku, who, may I remind you, is the killer in the final case of the Great Ace Attorney saga. Like, I guess he does get massively overshadowed by the true mastermind and main villain of the game, who we will talk about later, but the fact that this incredibly important character to one of the most popular Ace Attorney stories did so poorly was really surprising to me. I guess Jigoku isn't a super standout character, but I thought it was a little neat that they took the judge from the first case and made him an actual relevant character, and even the killer of a case, so it's kind of a shame seeing him like this. Similarly, Queen Garan of all people only got one vote as well, and she doesn't even have the excuse that there was a greater villain overshadowing her. She was the main villain of Spirit of Justice, and yet she only got one single vote. The final two really surprising ones were Misty and Morgan Fay. Misty I can kind of get, since her main role in the story is to be missing or dead, but Morgan is like one of the few recurring villains in the original trilogy and is extremely important to the final case of Trials and Tribulations, and yet she only got one vote. I guess people really just don't like her that much, huh? I also want to shout out Villain Bolshevik, who I find hilarious for literally being an extremist foreign revolutionary mentioned in 1-2 before randomly showing up as a witness in the final case as a juror. Just the fact that this guy shows up and has no actual bearing on the plot despite, being a terrorist or whatever is just so funny to me. Also, his mouse got a vote too. Shout out to the mouse. Besides all of those guys, there are some random minor characters that I wanted to mention, like Constable Barton, who is the first character on this list who technically does not originate from an Ace Attorney game, but is still technically valid for the purposes of this poll, being original to the Professor Layton series and making a cameo in the crossover, therefore legally making him an Ace Attorney character. Anyway, Barton is great, he's such a chill guy, and I wish the best for him. There's also the Detention Center Guard, who is technically one of the most recurring characters in the series, appearing in nearly every non-tutorial case in the main games, and who may or may not be a corpse, we don't know. There's Constantine, who is Barnum's dog from the Layton crossover, Edgar Piston, who is a character from the Ace Attorney anime and is featured in Northward Turnabout Express, a case original to said anime, the redheaded duo Fabien de Rousseau and Peppino de Rossi, who I wanted to highlight because while these guys only got one vote each, those votes were from separate people, meaning two people saw this pair of characters who are very obviously meant to be appreciated as a unit, and independently picked only one of them to vote for as a favorite, which I thought was really funny. There's also Edward Jones, who is one of Joe Dark's victims listed in the SL9 report, whom we know literally nothing about other than his name, Godot's musical theme, The Fragrance of Dark Coffee, which is the only music track to get voted for the poll, Hatsune Miku, Awkward Zombie, who is the artist who created the iconic Eat Your Hamburgers Apollo comic, I Heart Justice, who is a competitive Marvel vs. Capcom player who is known for playing Phoenix in that game, Ives Shinetto, who is a random named citizen of Kurian Village from Spirit of Justice, who I was surprised I didn't know about considering I love learning about incredibly obscure Ace Attorney game characters, Keiji Kiyowai, who is a character from the Japan-exclusive Ace Attorney VR attraction starring Emma Sky, which is a thing I bet most people did not know existed before now. Both Phoenix Wright and Manfred von Karma from the live-action Ace Attorney movie, which is a completely separate continuity from the game, so I included them on their own. Lynn from Ghost Trick Phantom Detective, Marmi Hida, who is a fictional stylist from the Italian translation of the first game invented to make the muffler plot point work, Missile the Pomeranian, who is Edgeworth's childhood dog from the anime, not to be confused with the Shiba Inu named Missile from the games, the Old Man from Deltarune, who I'm guessing was not actually voted for, but the submission just said Old Man, and since I had no way of knowing which Old Man they were referring to, I just put this guy down because I like him, Shu Takumi, who is the original creator of the Ace Attorney series and who is legally an Ace Attorney character due to cameoing in the live-action movie, the Bad, Pink, and Proto Badger, making sure that the whole family is on here with the Blue Badger, who's a bit higher up on the list, the chief guy in the back of Criminal Affairs, who's always on his computer, who is actually a pretty entertaining character if you take the time to examine him and all the cases he shows up in, the fake cardboard attorney's badge that Furio Tigre uses to impersonate Phoenix, the Great Ace Attorney Talking Oven, which is a real add-on for Japanese streaming ovens, which is a thing I'm just now learning it exists, that will have the oven greet you and recommend recipes using the voices of Ryunosuke and Susato. The jogger who witnessed Joe Dark burying the bodies, who could have also been Edward Jones, we don't really know. The Miracle Never Happened text box, which refers to this one line during the bad ending of Justice for All, which is an example of one of the funniest, scene-ruining typos in the series. You are likely to see this one on Ace Attorney Twitter after any kind of gaming presentation. There's the old woman attempting to climb into the park by Kitaki Mansion in Turnabout Corner, and the police officer trying to stop her from doing so. The turtle on top of Hasanaga's head, Tug It, and Isaac's absolutely horrendous brownies. If you know, you know. Moving on to the 2-vote characters, we also have way too many for me to mention out loud, so we're going with the same system. Going forward, just know that each and every one of the characters I list off will have gotten more votes than the main villain of Spirit of Justice. To start, I wanted to highlight 2 variants of Detective Dick Gumshoe. The first is the version of him from the French translation of the games. Anytime I got a vote for an alternate language version of a character, I did include them in with all the other votes for them, but I wanted to specifically highlight Gumshoe's beautiful French name, Dick Detective. The other Gumshoe is the breakdancing Gumshoe from the Ace Attorney stage plays, who does count separately due to being from a separate continuity, and it's just sick AF, honestly. I'm glad 2 people out there knew about him and decided to vote for him. Up next is Carmen Accidenti, who is a character original to the Layton crossover and 100% only got votes for having maybe one of the best names in the entire series. Like, wow, I wonder what's going to happen to this guy. The best part is that he's actually a fairly important character in the plot, so he's not even a quick joke name. You are going to hear this guy being name-dropped quite a few times, which makes it all the better. We also have Gaspin Payne, who did significantly worse than his brother, which makes sense, he's not nearly as likably pathetic. Ian Sideman, who is the guy assigned to replace Detective Vad in the IS-7 incident, who does not have any dialogue or even a physical appearance, and, need to remind you, still got more votes than Queen Garon. Inspector Chelmy, who is the other cameo character from the Layton series to show up in the crossover. He's a fun rival for Layton in the series' original trilogy. Juror number 3 from the 3rd case of the first Great Attorney game, and Juror number 6 from the 4th and 5th cases from the same game, who are apparently the most popular unnamed juror characters. Missile the dog, not the one from Ace Attorney, but from Ghost Trick Phantom Detective, which is a game that's basically cousins with Ace Attorney and something you should all go play right now. Cecil, the main protagonist from that game, also got 2 votes. A pillow shaped like a bloodstain, which was a real item that people could win through a promotional event they did for the release of Dual Destinies in Japan. The Thinker statue and the broken Ami Faye vase, who are both inanimate objects that receive more votes than some actual characters that you can interact with and speak to. Zach Gramari and Marvin Grossberg, who are both characters I expected to get way more votes, but I guess people don't really like them that much. Leona Clyde, who is the only character who got votes in the poll, who was original to one of the Ace Attorney stage shows, and is apparently Phoenix's love interest. This random guy in the magical turnabout who tries to steal the poster for Trucy's show outside the theater, who inexplicably managed to get 2 entire votes. I think I remember someone petitioning for him in the comments of my Reddit post about the poll, so I guess they managed to convince one other person to vote for him. Oh, and the poster guy's dog got a vote. I didn't mention that in the last segment. Finally, I want to bring up the character who I was most hoping would get at least 1 vote, and to my absolute joy, ended up with 2. That being my goat, Lucky. He is the random guard guy who shows up for like 30 seconds in Turnabout Revolution to tell Phoenix and Edgeworth that they've been summoned by the Queen. I don't know what it is about him, but just the fact that this guy has a name and a model with animations and stuff just tickles me. Like, they easily could have had this be a voice from off screen or just a written message, but the fact that they went out of their way to create a whole character to serve this specific purpose makes me love him. Oh, and his official position is Royal Back Rubber, which is just the icing on the peak flavored cake that is Lucky. Thank you to the 2 people who voted for him. You're both real ones. Now we're on to the 3-vote characters. The number of characters in this group and future ones aren't nearly as big as the 1 and 2 vote people, so I'm going to start listing them off by name from here on out. Here we have Artie Frost, Daily Vigil, Delicia Scone, Dr. Hottie, who I'm convinced people only voted for as a joke because there's no way people actually like this guy, Florent LaBelle, Jove Justice, Man of Mystery, Mask the Mask, who, due to the existence of Mask the Mask II, is its own title and identity outside of the original, I guess. Olivia Al Dente, who is a pretty fun character from the first case of the Layton crossover. Patricia Beat, who surprisingly ended up getting a few more votes than her husband. Taka, Black Quill's pet hawk, who I want to shout out for this specific animation when Black Quill slams his desk. I just thought it was really funny. The judge's weird Canadian brother. The storyteller, who was one of the main antagonists of the Layton crossover. I don't really remember much about him, but he has a pretty sick design. Venus, Wesley Stickler, who I'm also surprised managed to get this many votes. Widget, Zinc LeBlanc, and Dzibil Chal Chun Chun Chumil, who I'm sure you all know very well, meaning I don't really need to explain or elaborate anything about him. With 4 votes, we have Alita Tiala, Fifi Lagarde, Florence Needler, her grandma didn't get any votes in case you were wondering, Genshin Asogi, Inga Karkul How Could Disname Biani Langa or No Pompous Dan It Already Is Crying the Third, Johnny Smiles, Mr. Hat, Neil Marshall, who is another character who is long dead before the events of the game and has 0 lines of dialogue or really any notable actions besides fighting Joe Dark and dying, but despite all of that, he got quite a few more votes than several actual characters. There's Norma de Plume, Olga Orly, Selden, who was the criminal guy who told Shamspear about his hidden loot, and someone I'm pretty sure was only voted for by people trying to vote for the most obscure character they can think of, the Objection text bubble, who, to be honest, is probably the most well-known character in the series if you really think about it. The Attorney's Badge, who is famous for always being presented to someone when the protagonist meets them. Soseki's cat Wagahai. The Skulkin brothers, who despite being voted for separately on multiple occasions, still ended up with the same number of votes, which is nice. And finally, Yanni Yogi, who should really feel more important for being the killer in the final case of the first game, but ends up massively overshadowed by a certain other mastermind villain. Am I the only one who really feels like this guy should be discussed more? Like, he's a major player in the DL6 incident, and has a pretty tragic story to go along with it. But yeah, nobody really pays that much attention to this guy. I guess he's hurt by being in his goofy, senile old man facade for 99% of his screen time, but hey, there are some characters in this poll who had 0 seconds of screen time at all, and still managed to get decently high, so what would I know? Moving on to the 5-vote characters, we have Ada Mata, who is a character that is only mentioned during the end credits of Trials and Tribulations, where Lisa Basil says she hired him as Glenn Elk's replacement. I'm pretty sure people only voted for this guy for the same reason as Selden. I also think it's interesting how they made a whole portrait icon for this guy. Then there's Cindy Stone, who is only notable for being the first victim in the series. Shout out to whoever voted for her under the name Cinderblock. Then we have Maximilian Galactica, who I'm honestly surprised managed to get this many votes considering, you know, it really sucks because I do find him to be a pretty charming character otherwise, but they just had to make him romantically interested in a 16-year-old, didn't they? Then we have Nagito Kamida of Danganronpa fame, who is not eligible for this list, but I thought it was funny that he managed to get 5 votes, so I'll bring him up here. I hope he and Sans are happy together. Another character who is not eligible for this list is Mr. Schaffrillas Productions himself, who I think deserves to be mentioned here for being the primary inspiration for this video. Thank you, Mr. Productions. I hope you're having a very shiny day. Moving along, there's Wright's Many Memo, Victor Kudo, who someone voted for as just that old guy who keeps throwing beans at me, Yuri Cosmos, who is probably one of the most entertaining witnesses in Dual Destinies, which is saying a lot since that game has a lot of good ones, and the Steel Samurai. With 6 votes, we have a weirdly small batch of only 4 characters, those being Beppo, Lisa Basil, Sean Fenn, and Soren Sprocket. I don't really have much to say about Beppo, he's kind of funny I guess. Lisa Basil is also fine. I like her design, and I think it's really funny that her role in the story is so small that she literally just got cut out of the anime, which I don't think happened to anyone else in the trilogy. Sean Fenn is another character I'm surprised isn't all that popular. Investigations 2 is a pretty well-liked game, and he's a pretty important character in that game's final case, but I never really see anyone talking about him. As for Soren Sprocket, he's pretty cool I guess. I like how introverted he is, and his memory condition is pretty interesting. I'm not sure how accurate it is to any similar real-life conditions, but it at least makes a compelling story. Oh, and the animation where he's carrying Ellen is really cute. Moving on to the 7-vote characters, we have a lot more to work with here. We have the Bellboy, who is a weirdly really charming character and who has never received a canon name, which is pretty funny. Bodhidharma Canis, Chief Inspector Toby, Guy Eldun, who I really wish got to show up in another game. I thought he was really likable. Magnus McGilded. Olive Green, who is a character that really surprised me as they took who was basically just another random victim character in the first game and turned her into honestly one of the most compelling sympathetic culprits in the series, IMO. Orla Shipley, who's kind of the poster girl for all the ridiculous crap that happens in this series, as Phoenix defending a literal orca whale is kind of the peak of absurdity in this franchise. Red White, who might be one of the biggest examples of aura loss in the entire series. It is insane how well they build up this guy as an intimidating villain during the investigation, only for him to crumple like a wet tissue the second he gets up on the witness stand. I could go on, but that's another rant for another day. And finally, we have Lauren Pops, who will be the subject of our first special guest segment. Everyone give a round of applause for Quack.
Lauren Pops is a very unpopular character from an unpopular case, and as a result gets a lot of, in my opinion, unwarranted hate. But why is that? Some criticisms fans use are that she's annoying one note and fails to provide proper motivation for the player to help her. I disagree heavily. When she first appears, I was instantly endeared to this sopping wet cat of a girl and her adorable design. The fact she sees her ring pop as a symbol of quote-unquote love with Lance is hilarious, and the gimmick of simping for Edgeworth doesn't come off as creepy or overbearing, but instead amusingly pathetic in a harmless way. Compared to Miss Oldbag in the same case, it's night and day. But unlike most other Ace Attorney witnesses, these gags have meaning beyond silly gimmicks. As you learn about the tragedy of Colin DeVory being falsely imprisoned and separated from his daughter, certain things start to make more sense, namely Lauren's fairy tale image of love, becoming easily attached to men she doesn't know very well, or her many insecurities that she berates herself for out loud. It's easy to understand why she would go along with the plans of a dipshit loser like Lance under those circumstances. It's all because of a yearning for the attention she never got. These sympathetic traits also fit Lauren's role as a false suspect in the final part of the case. I buy that Edgeworth would actually want to help this lady more than most other false suspects from investigations because of his own experiences with losing his father and being betrayed by someone he admires. I can't praise the catharsis at the end of Kidnapped Turnabout enough. Having been callously set up by the same family she tried to be part of, you helped Lauren realize that she had been truly loved by her father, who watched over her until the end. It's a beautiful conclusion, and the case would have been way worse off without it in my opinion. Oh, and forgive my brief aside, but did anyone else expect Pops to be another typical Ace Attorney female culprit who puts on a cute facade to manipulate their victims? For most of the Kidnapped Turnabout, it seems like they're building up to Lauren being an elite Tatiala-esque traitor to the Amano family, so it's a pretty cool subversion of the trends the series had built up, that she ended up being the victim instead. Anyway, to summarize, we have a character whose comedic traits have deeper purpose, relating to her backstory and motives, who gives investigations one a much-needed character outside of the main cat, who is directly affected by the actions of the smuggling ring, and who makes her case way more compelling. I mean, it's not like the other one-off characters introduced in the Kidnapped Turnabout were doing it any favors. Really, the only flaw I have with Lauren is something many other characters suffer from, a lack of screen time. Perhaps giving her a role in another case to show her personal growth would have helped? But I digress. Why is Lauren among the fans' most despised characters? Why does she consistently get lumped in with the most terrible, or blandest case 3 witnesses in the series? I truly don't get it. Anyway, I've rambled long enough. Thanks so much to Kara for giving me a chance to spread my agenda of a character no one else seems to give a damn about as much as I do. Hopefully I can help inspire the masses to realize the majesty that is Lauren. Goodbye, viewer, and consider joining the Pro Pops revolution.
Moving on to the 8-vote characters, we have Albert Harebrain, Cody Hatkins, Dee Vasquez, Emir Punchenbog, Giru Tornado, Herman Crab, Jinxie Tenma, Marlon Rhymes, Shu the Cat, Sister Bikini, and Excelsius Winner. Dee Vasquez is actually one of the more underrated villains from the original trilogy in my opinion. I like how she remains calm and composed no matter what happens, which makes her breakdown where all she does is snap her pipe still feel effective. I also really like how they kept her relationship with Manuel and whether Hammer killing him was an accident or not vague. Ace Attorney really doesn't include story elements that are left up to interpretation like that very much at all, and it's really interesting to me. On the opposite end of characters, there's Amir Bunchenbog, who is absolutely one of the most memorable witness characters from the Layton crossover. Then there's Giru Tornado, who on her own is a pretty alright killer, not really anything special, but I think we all know about a certain video from a while back that got her a lot of attention. It was honestly really bizarre seeing people who weren't super familiar with Ace Attorney talking about this relatively obscure character back then. I think it would be really funny if anyone actually became interested in Ace Attorney because of her appearance in that video, because that would mean they would have to go through almost the entirety of the main series just to get to her case. Herman Crab was a really memorable side character from Turnabout Reclaimed, where he made for an actually pretty convincing red herring. He was kind of the embodiment of true neutral, where he really didn't care about anything besides doing his job as the aquarium vet. He's definitely one of my favorite witnesses from the sequel trilogy. Also, it's really cute how he has a baby penguin in his hair. That was good too. Another great witness is Sister Bikini, who is honestly just a really friendly and helpful character in 3-5. Her relationship with Iris is really sweet. She can be genuinely really funny sometimes. Definitely another underrated trilogy character, and one I'm glad got at least a few votes. Then there's Excelsius Winner, who I would definitely call one of the most evil characters in the series. Like, there's at least 4 or 5 people whose deaths can be directly or indirectly traced back to him. There's a chance he straight up had his wife murdered, and he may take the award for the worst father in the entire series, which is saying a lot. Hell, you could even argue that he was responsible for the DL6 incident. As for his actual character writing, I do think all of his evil deeds and his unapologetically corrupt philosophies do make him a pretty entertaining villain. Just maybe not one of the absolute best of the bests. I think he would need to be like the main final villain of a game to reach that spot, which may be why he didn't get too many votes, on top of the Investigations cast generally not doing super well compared to their contemporaries. Oh, and shout out to Curry, I love Great Excelsius. On to the 9-vote characters, we have Darian Crescend, Ellen Wyatt, Penny Nichols, Regina Berry, Ted Tonate, and Viola Cadaverini. Darian and Ted are 2 characters I don't really have much to say about. Honestly, the most notable thing about Darian to me is his interesting hairstyle, but I do kind of wish we got to see a little more of his relationship with Clavier. I think his confrontation in 4-3 had the potential for some great stuff if we got to see more of them interacting. Ellen is a character who I think is just super cute. Nearly all of her animations are super fun and make her really endearing to me. To be honest, I was fully prepared for her to be a not super interesting character, but she almost immediately turned that around once her true self came out. I'm honestly so glad to see Penny Nichols up this relatively high. For a while, she was kind of the poster child for forgettable Ace Attorney characters, and while 9 votes isn't a whole lot in the big picture, it is nice to know at least a handful of people appreciate her. Another underrated trilogy lady, in my opinion, is Regina, who a lot of people seem to find annoying, but I find her personality more cute and endearing than anything. She didn't deserve any of the shit surrounding her in Big Top. And then there's Viola, who I really wish we got to see more of in 3-3. I think she has a really cool design, personality, and backstory, and I feel like that case could have been a lot more if they really focused on her, but she ended up getting pretty sidelined by her companion. The 10-vote category is our smallest so far, with a measly 3 characters, being Clay Terran, Hugh O'Connor, and Ray Mambami. Clay is an interesting and definitely a bit divisive character. Obviously, enough people like him to vote him as one of their favorites, which is pretty impressive for a victim character we never actually get to meet, but a lot of other people kind of see him as a bit of a cheap way to make Apollo relevant to the plot. Like, it definitely feels a little forced to introduce this guy, who, again, the player never actually gets to meet, that Apollo swears up and down is his bestest best friend in the world, only for said friend to never be mentioned anywhere outside of Dual Destinies. However, I am trying not to be super negative with this video, so I will say that the few interactions between Apollo and Clay we do know about are really sweet, and I do think that his death and Apollo's subsequent suspicion of Athena makes for some really interesting drama in the final case. Hugh O'Connor is our first member of the Themis Academy squad to appear on this list. Turnabout Academy has a pretty stellar cast of side characters, and I think Hugh is definitely included in that. I find his whole egotistical top student facade to be pretty funny, and I think the reveal that his grades were fake and he's actually a 25-year-old man to be pretty interesting twists, even if the latter is definitely a little weird. Like, I'm not even 25 yet, and the idea of going back to high school at my age sounds like a nightmare. Anyway, probably the best thing I could say about Hugh is that he feels like the human version of Birdley, which is a compliment, don't worry. Then we have Ray Mambami, who might be the closest thing we have to a canon lesbian Ace Attorney character besides a certain other lady later on the list. I mean, she is straight up in love with Susato, right? Like, every other line she says when talking to her elicits a raised eyebrow accompanied by a rainbow flag. Anyway, I do wish we got to see more of her outside of just the second Great Ace Attorney's tutorial, but what we do get is pretty nice. Capcom, give us a Great Ace Attorney 3 that has a full chapter of Susato and Ray working on a case together. I will pay you $2 gazillion if you do. With 11 votes, we have April May, Betty and Bonnie DeFemme, Espella Cantabella, Luke Triton, and Politician. April is a character I was surprised managed to get as many votes as she did. For me, she just kind of ended up being a not super memorable witness who plays on tropes I think are done better later on in the series. However, I won't deny that she's a pretty iconic part of the first game, likely due to her being your second ever witness and having a, let's just say, striking appearance. Plus, I know a lot of people interpret her as being threatened by Wright to be an accomplice in his plan, so I think that also leads to people liking her. Not personally my thing, but I'm glad she has some fans. Much like the Skulkin brothers, all of Bonnie and Betty's votes were received separately, but they still coincidentally ended up with the same number of votes, which is nice to see. I think these two ended up being some of my favorite witnesses in SOJ and the sequel trilogy as a whole. I don't know, they just have really fun designs and animations, they have a really charming dynamic with one another, and I think the whole reveal that the secret behind Bonnie's vanishing act was that she had an identical twin was really clever. It also kind of ended up subverting the trope of cutesy female character who ends up being aggressive by making Bonnie's supposed dark side just be an entirely different person. Big fan of these two. Then we have Aspella Cantabella. If you haven't played the Professor Layton crossover, Aspella is by far the most important and prominent original character from this game, with her being a part of the main party along with Layton, Phoenix, and their companions. I don't personally have much to say about her since it's been a very long time since I've played her game, but from what I remember, I think she's a charming enough character with an interesting story, so if you want to learn more, go play the crossover, which I know is easier said than done, but still. Speaking of Layton, our next character is the Professor's dedicated apprentice, Luke Triton. If you haven't played the Layton series, Luke is Layton's main companion, appearing at his side in every game. Essentially the Maya of his series. He and Layton have a really cute dynamic, and their relationship is kind of the backbone of the original trilogy. A weird fun fact about Luke in the crossover specifically is, while Luke has a different voice actress in the North American and European versions of the series, his voice in that game is his European one, even in the NA version. As an American, this took me really off guard when I first played it, and it kind of annoyed me since I was obviously attached to the NA voice. However, as time has gone on, I've grown to like the European voice more. No shade to the actors for the NA version at all, I just prefer the quote-unquote original voice more. And for our last 11 vote character, we have Paul Letition, who may be one of the funniest villains in the entire series. I don't know, I'm just a big fan of characters like him who try to act all high and mighty and superior, but are honestly just completely pathetic and nobody really takes them seriously. If you're a Deltarune fan, he has a lot of rules card energy, if you get what I mean. But yeah, even though he does end up doing some pretty awful stuff, this character's main appeal is his comedy. I love all the animations he has in his palanquin, and the fact he physically walks onto and off of the witness stand instead of fading in and out like everyone else is somehow the funniest thing ever. Great stuff. With 12 votes, we have Ashley Graydon, Kimmy Meal, Calais Polano, Courtney Scythe, Clint Van Zeeks, Rhoda Tenero, William Shamspeare, and the Blue Badger. Ashley is a great Ace Attorney villain who I find to be super underrated. I know he's an extremely obvious culprit despite being the one for the final case, but I think he ends up being a surprise in a different way. You would expect him to be this pretty one-note, stuck-up rich jerk, but he actually ends up being a pretty tragic character when you learn his backstory, and that ends up adding a really strong emotional core to the case. I especially love his reminiscence theme in Ashen Dance, which is probably my favorite of those from outside the original trilogy. As I said before, I think he's a really underrated culprit for a really underrated case in my opinion. It's pretty fitting that both Rhoda and Cammy ended up getting the same amount of votes. Rhoda's a nice enough character. I like how she tries to put on a mask of professionality and have it all together, but in reality she's really self-conscious. Very relatable. Not an absolute standout among side characters, but she's not unpleasant to have around. Besides Lance Amano, who deservedly did not receive any votes on this list, Cammy is our first Investigations 1 culprit on the list, which I think is indicative of that game's otherwise pretty memorable and entertaining cast of culprits. I think Cammy's whole shtick of being tired all the time and constantly falling asleep is pretty funny, and serves as a good contrast when she finally locks in once you confront her. Also from Investigations 1 is Calais Polano, who is probably one of my favorite characters exclusive to that game. I really like how you might think he's this sleazy, scamming businessman on first impression, but turns out to 100% mean well and ends up being very helpful and supportive throughout his case. Courtney Scythe is definitely one of the more memorable new characters introduced in Greatest Attorney 2, having a really nice design and musical theme, and being an important part of the story despite only showing up in Case 3. I do wish we got to see more of her since she doesn't show up a lot in that case, and I'm not sure how I feel about her being the last minute surprise culprit, although it does lead to a really cool moment where Ryunosuke delays winning the case in order to pursue the truth. William Shamspeare is really interesting as a villain because he isn't actually the culprit of his case, but the victim. It's a really unique experience having a case about an attempted murder and having the victim be this antagonistic force in the story. Sure, he does turn out to be a murderer and serves a similar structural role to other culprits, but he really stands out to me for offering this slight twist on the formula. As for his actual character, I think he's pretty funny, and his ridiculous antics and mannerisms act as an amazing contrast for the horrible stuff he did in the past. And then we have the Blue Badger himself, a true icon of Ace Attorney if I do say so myself. He fills a similar role to the Steel Samurai, being this neat in-universe mascot who pops up frequently, especially in the DS games. Also, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have Blue Badger-related trauma after Rise from the Ashes due to the video footage segment and the minigame where you have to make the plot look like his face, which I think is pretty funny. That minigame is not that hard, you guys. With 13 votes, we have a small batch of characters, starting with Birdley. No, not that Birdley. I'm talking about Birdley with an I from the Professor Layton crossover, who is a bard dude who, as his name suggests, has a bird. Yeah, he's kind of the least memorable witness from that case, which includes his bird, so I'm fairly certain people only voted for this guy because of his shared name with someone else. But hey, maybe there are some diehard Birdley fans out there. Let me know in the comments if you're watching. After that, we have Valant Grimari, who I really think should have made some kind of appearance outside of AA4. I mean, he is the last living member of Troop Grimari as far as most people know, so I feel like he should have at least showed up in the magical turnabout, right? Regardless, Valant is definitely one of the more interesting characters exclusive to AJ, with him being one of the more morally ambiguous characters in the series. I mean, he framed Zack for Magnifie's murder. If he hadn't done that, then Zack's trial just wouldn't have happened, which has massive ramifications for the entire sequel trilogy. And then there's the fact that he kept that to himself, even after Zack went into hiding, causing Trucy to lose her father. It isn't a good look, especially when he eventually ends up trying to get the performance rights for Magnifie's tricks. But in the end, he actually ends up doing something really honorable by choosing to turn himself in for what he did, with him not wanting Zack to be remembered as a murderer. Really interesting stuff here, and again, I really wish we got to hear from him in another game. And for our third 13-vote character, we have who might be one of Ace Attorney's most infamous characters, none other than Ambassador Quirkus Alba. Anyone who's beaten Investigations 1 knows just why this guy has the reputation he has among Ace Attorney fans, having one of the longest and most drawn-out takedowns of any culprit in the series, which isn't helped by how desperate and ridiculous the arguments he tries to make up end up being. Like, this segment is almost 2 straight hours of cross-examining this guy in a case that's already pretty long, taking up nearly a third of the runtime. However, due to the sort of so bad it's good meme status that has developed around Alba and the Ace Attorney community, I can't help but look back on this guy fondly, to the point where he's actually the highlight of a blaze for me. Those ridiculous lengths he goes to get away with Manny Cochin's murder, and how much emphasis he puts on his extraterritorial rights, just end up being really funny to me. However, I don't really want to get into this type of commentary on the character since I do want to keep this video as positive as possible, like I said. After all, Alba ended up getting over a dozen votes. Whether or not those are from people who genuinely like the character or from people who voted for him as a meme, I'm not sure, but it's better to be safe than sorry, you know? Speaking of people who genuinely like Quirkus Alba, I decided to invite a special guest to talk about his thoughts on this beautiful, beautiful man.
Hey, it's Curiosity Man speaking. I want to talk about why I love Quirkus Alba. Well, I can't get off every single reason because if I do, then I'm going to go over my time limit. So I'm going to try to stay within the limit. I know people think the confrontation is too long and annoying, which is fair. However, I actually think the length, being as long as it is perfect for the kind of character Quirkus Alba is. It's perfect. One, because of the fact that he is a soldier. He will march on and on and on, no matter what, and he will never back down. And this is something that I heavily respect with regard to Quirkus Alba. The second reason is because of the kind of invincible culprit that he is. He represents a part of it being invincible that I feel most of the other culprits really don't represent, and that is the fact that if you have enough power and resources at your disposal or whatever else, it doesn't matter what you say. You can just say whatever the hell you want. You can say you have to take a fucking shit as an excuse for why you didn't do something. You can say, oh, I'm a real fan of the Steel Samurai and this and that. You could have the worst excuses of all time and still get away with it. That's the kind of person Kurosawa is. I think that that's highly reflective of several people throughout our human history. It also helps that I also think that he has a banger soundtrack, so whenever he talks, I'm enjoying and bopping my head, honestly. And then on top of that, I'm not gonna lie, I do think he's kind of hot. What? Who said that? Anyways, that's it for my segment. Take care.
Thank you for coming on, Curry. I hope you have an alba-tastic rest of your day. Anyway, moving on to the 14 vote characters, we have Judy Bound, Richard Wellington, and Winston Payne. Judy is genuinely such a great character, probably my favorite one-off character in Investigations 2, and probably the Investigations duology as a whole. Her story is so tragic, and the lengths she ends up going to save her father figure is honestly so heartbreaking. The scene at the end of Case 3 where she breaks down in tears after Eddie says he'll defend her gets me every time. She's also really great visually too. Her animations are so charming and fun to watch, with the one where she taps back and forth when she's anxious being a personal favorite of mine. Oh, and while this isn't really the sort of thing I usually pay attention to, her modern day version has to be one of the prettiest characters in the entire series. Such a good character, and I wish she was able to make it even higher on the list. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum tonally, we have Richard Wellington, who I'm honestly really glad has some other fans. Is he kind of a one-note tutorial villain? Sure, but he also ends up being a really memorable and funny one-note villain that doesn't end up overstaying his welcome. Something about the Ace Attorney community that I always thought was weird is how much people seem to hate the Lost Turnabout. Sure, it's nowhere near a great or even a particularly good case, but I see people acting like it's one of the worst in this series. Like, come on guys, it's like inoffensive and bland at worst. I can't really find myself hating it since it has this guy in it. He fits into that archetype I mentioned earlier with politician, being a pompous dude with a huge ego, but nobody in the story actually respects or takes seriously at all. Like, this dude gave us the whole bunch of bananas bit, how could you hate him? And then we have Winston Payne, who surprised me with how relatively low he ended up being. Like, he obviously isn't a super popular or talked about character, but I thought he would get at least a few more votes considering he's one of the most recurring characters in the series. Like, he appears in every game before the 3DS, and even after that, his family members are showing up in his place. I guess the bit about Phoenix not remembering who he is has some truth to it, since it didn't seem like many people remembered this guy when voting, huh? Anyway, I don't actually have that much to say about him either. He can be funny sometimes. I like how he has incredibly stupid hair in TT and AJ. And I like how Edgeworth assumes he's a janitor in Investigations, and that's about it, I think. Up next, we actually have our first character to get a completely unique number of votes. Our only character to get 15 votes is none other than Miriam Scuttlebutt. Yeah, I think it's a little fitting that she ended up with a unique number considering how misanthropic she is. She's comfortable being alone in her box with her 15 votes. Speaking of which, Miriam's box serves as a very fun and visually striking element of her character. I love how expressive the little eyes you can see in the box are, and so many of her other animations are very charming, like the one where she spins her pen in her hand. I also find it endearing how her antagonism towards the Themis gang is due to a desire to be friends with them. Reminds me a lot of Betty in a way. After her, we have another character with a unique number of votes, being Dats Arabal with 16 votes. Yeah, Dats is pretty great, being such a fun and friendly character despite what you're told about him at first. His animations are so expressive, and his loyalty to Dirk is really admirable. I don't really have much else to say, he's just a pretty great character, and I wish people talked about him more. And with 17 votes, we have... nobody. Yeah, nobody got exactly 17 votes, making this the first time where we skip over a vote total. However, we're back to normal with our 18 vote characters, being Esmeralda Tuspels, Mal Strongheart, Sasha Buckler, Satoru Hasanaga, and one of Ace Attorney's most iconic figures, Charlie. So yeah, if your favorite character got less than 18 votes, just know that more people voted for a potted houseplant than them. In all seriousness, I do think Charlie makes for a very pleasant presence in the series. The fact that he sticks around for the entire main series beginning to end, no matter how many changes the office goes through, is oddly comforting, and in a way, is Mia's legacy being preserved as time goes on since Charlie originally belonged to her. I always make sure to check on him in every case I can. As for the actual humans who got 18 votes, we begin with Esmeralda Tuspels, who is a really unique idea for a character, being a wax sculptor who is also a witch. Pretty much everything about her is really fun, from her design to her animations to the fact that she seemingly has Sholmes completely under her thumb, with her paying him to pose as a sculpture in her museum. I really like how she's kind of this true neutral presence in the story, not having much particular interest in anything that doesn't involve her trade, and not letting anyone push her around at all. She really does have this presence that makes it so nobody wants to or is able to mess with her. Oh, and the fact that she was able to sculpt the professor's face after digging up his body is raw as hell. Very cool character. Mal Strongheart ended up getting fewer votes than I expected, considering he's the main villain of the Great Ace Attorney saga, although I can understand that he gets a little overshadowed by a certain other Ace Attorney villain that he often gets compared to. Personally, I find his motivations and actions to be really interesting, and I really like the idea of him masterminding everything that happened, but never actually directly spilling blood himself. That, plus the authority he wields as the judge of the final case, makes him feel like a truly insurmountable bad guy to take down. I really like the scene where, after fully confessing to everything he did, he ends up saying, "So what?" and almost convinced the gallery that what he did was justified and that he shouldn't be punished. Oh, and I think he definitely has one of the best breakdowns in the series for me. Shout out to his name in the original Japanese, Heart Vortex, which is really cool, even if his localized name still works better for the English version. For the last of our 3 Great Ace Attorney characters in the 18-vote group, we have Satoru Hasanaga. When I was playing the first 2 cases of Great Ace Attorney 1, I was definitely sure that Hasanaga was going to be our main detective character like Gumshoe or Emma, but he kinda just vanished from the plot after case 2 and only made a cameo in 2-1. Despite his limited screen time, he's still a very memorable character for me. I think it's fun how he always shows up in some kind of disguise, and I like how he's always following the path he thinks is right, even if it doesn't end up being the correct one. And for our last 18-vote character, we have Sasha Buckler, who is yet another great side character from Dual Destinies, having the amazing character design and animations that are expected from that game. Sasha is a pretty underrated character in my opinion, having a really fun personality to go with her appearance, and actually having some depth to her to go along with it. I find it really admirable how she insists on doing the orca show even at the risk of her own life, which makes for some really compelling drama going on behind the case. Oh, and it looks like it's time to call on another special guest to talk about Sasha. Say hi to Belle, everyone.
Sasha Buckler is a character that, for 3 years now, has been extremely special to me. She's even inspired my college major and career goals by helping me discover my interest in animals, and also my interest in aquariums. Not only is she super fun as a character, but even for a defendant, she feels super human and fleshed out. She's such a kind and forgiving person, and she would do anything for those she cares about, animal or not. Even when the culprit is revealed, she welcomes them back to the aquarium with open arms. When people talk about Turnabout Reclaimed, they usually think about other characters like Marlin or Hermit. But for me, that's Sasha's case. She's integral to fully understanding it, and she's the driving force that got Phoenix involved. Plus, she's a character whose story is just central to the case. Her emotions, her passion, her ability to move forward and help others do the same, her relationships with the rest of the crew, her parallels and contrasts in relation to the culprit. I could go on forever. But the most important thing to me that I have to point out is that Sasha vowed to become the best trainer she could be in Azura's, her deceased mentor's, honor. And the case chooses to wrap itself up by showing that Sasha may have even surpassed Azura. And it's not just that she made it past Azura's death and the anniversary that, had she performed, she likely would have died as well. She learned to take care of herself, and it resulted in her being able to prosper and take both orcas under her fin for performances, not just performing with one like Azura did. There's so much more to it all, but to me, Sasha Buckler is a truly amazing character wrapped up really neatly. She's a part of me.
Moving on to the 19-vote characters, we have Angel Starr, Robin Newman, Zacharias Barnum, and The Phantom. A major dilemma I ran into while tallying up the votes was whether I should separate votes for Bobby Fulbright and The Phantom, or lump them all together. In the end, I decided not to, since there were a few people that specified they were voting for one and not the other, and Fulbright was a real guy that The Phantom was doing a perfect impression of, so saying that you like his Fulbright persona specifically would pretty much be like saying you liked Fulbright as he was when he was still alive, even if we never technically meet him. So yeah, don't worry Fulbright fans, we'll be talking about him later on the list. As for The Phantom, I do think the idea of a killer who is this master of disguise whose true face and name is completely unknown to everyone, including himself, is a really cool idea, and adds a lot of tension to Dual Destiny's final case. However, I do think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, as that lack of identity means he doesn't really have any kind of past or backstory to add to his potential depth. Because of this, I personally find him to be the least interesting final villain in the main series, but that doesn't mean I think he's a bad character. I really like how he begins impersonating a bunch of characters near the end, with his Phoenix disguise being particularly fun, and his mood matrix section where it shows all of his expressive Fulbright animations, but literally none of the emotions are going off, is honestly really creepy. Speaking of which, that breakdown where his mask begins to sag and he starts pulling at it may be one of the most unsettling moments in all of Ace Attorney. Really cool stuff. Another 19-vote character from Dual Destinies is Robin Newman, who may be one of my favorite side characters from the whole series. I'm not sure what it is about her, but I just really like her energy in both of her personas. Although the trope is a little old and played completely straight, the reveal around her gender is pretty fun, and even though she is canonically cis, her story can definitely be read as allegorical for the transgender experience, which is also pretty cool, even if it probably wasn't intended. I mean, the modern port did change some dialogue to be less offensive, so either way, I really like her, and I hope she comes back one day. Up next, we have Inquisitor Barnum, who is by far the least popular of the main rival characters. That may be due to the Layton crossover being the game people have played the least by far, but I also don't find him to be a super memorable character anyway, although that could just be down to me not having played his game in a really long time. Even so, I do think there are some fun things about him, like the animations he has with his sword, and his general knightly attitude. Maybe I'd have more to say about him if I replayed the game, but he's kind of a blind spot for me right now. And then we have Angel Star, who is actually our first Rise from the Ashes character in the poll, or at least the first one that isn't a corpse before the start of the case. Really goes to show how strong this particular case's cast is. But yeah, Angel's a pretty fun character with all the lunches she pulls out and her fierce hatred of prosecutors. However, she is the Rise character I have the least to say about. She's cool, but gets a little overshadowed by other major characters from that case, in my opinion. And now we've made it to the characters who received at least 20 votes, starting with a duo who ended up with exactly 20, being Aristotle Means and Army Buff. Along with Alba, Aristotle Means has to be one of the most unintentionally funny characters in the series, because the game is so unsubtle with him. Need I bring up the absolute pinnacle of writing that is the line, "For the ends really do justify the means, especially for me, Professor Aristotle Means." Like, guys, do you think the ends justify the means is a bad philosophy? I'm not sure what the game is trying to say here. In all seriousness, I do think Means is a good enough example of the Dark Age of the Law in action, and his transformation in court is really fun, so I can't really bring myself to dislike him much at all. And then there's Army Buff, who is just a really sweet character overall. Her story's really sad, and it's nice getting to watch her try to overcome her trauma and regain her confidence. And the shenanigans with her drone are pretty funny too, with the bits where she grabs objects like the judge's gavel being particularly entertaining. Definitely the highlight of the America portion of 6-5 for me, and I'm glad to see her get a decent number of votes. It does rub me the wrong way a little that it turns out she could walk the whole time and she's out of a wheelchair by the end. It's not the worst thing in the world, but some proper permanent disability rep like that could have been nice, I guess. With 21 votes, we have only a single character, being Spark Brushel, who I was surprised to see get this many votes. I kinda had the impression that most people disliked this guy, but it seems he managed to gather a decent following. Personally, I always kinda like this guy. Sure, his animations can be a little off-putting, and his perceived tail being as sweaty pits is definitely gross, but I think he's a pretty likable character otherwise. In particular, I like the Mason system scene where Phoenix talks to him at Drew's studio. He ends up being extremely knowledgeable about the history of the Grimoires and facilitates a lot of the big twists involving them. So yeah, not the most mind-blowing character in the world, but one I'm glad seems to have some fans. With 22 votes, we have another duo, being Desiree Delight and Jean Grey Earl. Desi is another fun character from the original trilogy. Her relationship with Ron is really cute, and I love how head over heels in love with him she is despite how different they seem from one another. In particular, I enjoy how chill she is with Ron being mask to mask. I feel like they could have set up a really tired liar reveal type plot point, but I like how they subverted that. She isn't a super active presence in 3-2, mainly serving as Ron's motivation for becoming a thief, but she definitely improves the case just by being there. Oh, and it took me forever to realize that her earrings look like wheels. That's cool. And then there's Jean Grey Earl, who I can't really say much about without spoiling the case he's in, but I'll just say he's definitely one of the most memorable new characters from the Layton crossover, and he has a really compelling and tragic story that makes him stand out. If you want to know more, you'll just have to go play the game right now. Then, at 23 votes, we have a single character who surprised me with how poorly they ended up performing compared to what I expected. That being Lamoire, aka Thalassa Grimari. Yeah, only 23 votes feels pretty low for a character I thought was pretty popular, but I guess she doesn't have as much reach as I thought she did in the overall Ace Attorney community. I suppose she technically only plays a major role in one case, but she's definitely the highlight of that case for me, just being this really pleasant and calming presence that adds a lot to the story. I really like the twist that she was actually the blind one in her duo with Machi, and her theme music is honestly one of my favorites in the series. And then there's her backstory as Thalassa we get to learn about in AJ's final case, which is some really interesting stuff. I know she technically cameos at the end of SOJ, but I do really hope we get to see her make a proper return in a future game, and hopefully actually finally tell her kids that they're related to her and each other. Okay, so if Thalassa only getting 23 votes was a little upsetting, then I think learning who ended up getting exactly one more vote than she did will definitely make it sting a lot more. So, with 24 votes, we have Deed Man. Yep, much like Charlie, if your favorite character has already been mentioned up to this point, I hope you're happy knowing that they lost to Deed Man. Okay, so I think I may have influenced the votes a little here, since the rules of the poll use Deed Man as an example for one of them, so I may have implanted the idea of voting for him in people's heads. But regardless, here we are with Deed Man at 24 votes. So, Deed Man is obviously known for having one of the most on-the-nose pun names in the entire series, which is accentuated by the fact that he may be the most irrelevant character they have ever made a full profile for in one of these games. He isn't even a victim in the case you actually investigate, is instead the victim in the trial which precedes the events of Turnabout Reminiscence. Deed Man has zero character outside of the fact that he was employed at the Cadopian Embassy, was going to testify against the smuggling ring, and was shot by Macrel. He has literally no other character details and has zero impact on the plot, and yet they went out of their way to create a name and face for this guy and added him to the court record. So yeah, this guy's entire existence is inherently funny, and he ended up being the most popular joke pick on the list, unless there are somehow unironic Deed Man fans out there who legitimately consider him to be one of their favorite characters. If you exist out there, please let me know. I would like to study you under a microscope. At 25 votes, we have a decent-sized batch of characters, with Maggie Bird, Juniper Woods, Roger Aitins, Waki Gitaki, and High Inquisitor Darklaw. Maggie is another character I'm glad got a decent number of votes. If you have any significant familiarity with my presence on Twitter, you would know that earlier this year I entered what I would call my Maggie Bird era, where I just posted about her all the time. I don't know what it was, but she just kind of suddenly became a character I really liked one day, and she ended up basically becoming the mascot for my account, which has stuck around to this day. As for her actual character, she definitely has a strong, endearing underdog charm to her, with her trying her best to get by in life despite her supernaturally terrible luck. Despite her unluckiness, she doesn't really come off as super off-kilter or quirky like a lot of the clients in the series can, leading to her feeling like one of the more relatively normal characters in the series. I also really like her design and all the outfits she gets throughout the games, and her relationship with Gumshoe is pretty cute. If I voted on the poll, she would have been one of my 5 picks, definitely. Up next, we have another lady who got accused of murder more than once, that being Juniper Woods. Yeah, I like Juniper a lot. Her design and personality is really cute. I like how she shows up as the defendant in case 1 of Dual Destinies, only to show up later in the game where her character is expanded on, and I absolutely love her relationship with Athena. Like, Juniper, why go for Apollo when Athena is right there ready to do anything for you? Anyway, I don't really have that much else to say about her other than I'm really excited for when she returns in the Athena game that's definitely being made. Right? Capcom, right? After her, we have another defendant from the sequel trilogy, Waki Kitaki, who I'm really surprised made it up this high. I feel like back in the day, people didn't really like Waki that much, with them finding his aggressive and uncooperative attitude annoying. But I guess opinion has shifted a little since then, which I'm happy to see, since, yeah, I also like Waki. I personally find his over-the-top, trying too hard, fake gangster attitude pretty funny, which makes his few genuinely heartfelt moments hit all the harder. I also like how he calls Alita his little imposter, so yeah, good character. I'm glad a decent number of people voted for him. Then we have who ended up being one of the most popular one-off villains, being Roger Raytins, aka the original Mr. Rias. I like how this guy has a unique charm in both of his personas. When he's in his sleazy TV producer mode, he honestly has to be one of the most hateable characters in this series with all the shit he piles on Trucy and the rest of the agency, and that laid-back and mocking tone he puts on through all of it. Ugh, I just really want to punch that guy in the face, but in a good way. And then on top of all that, it turns out he actually has a pretty interesting past that ties to the lore of the previous games. His animations when he's in magician mode are so good, especially the one where he holds the fire in his hands. That one goes so hard. Honestly, just a really cool villain who ended up being both hateable and compelling at the same time. Good stuff. And for our final 25-vote character, we have High Inquisitor Darklaw, who also happens to be the most popular original character from the Layton crossover. Yeah, you can really tell that this game is the one the least amount of people have played. The most popular character and only 25 votes. Well, regardless of how she performed, I can definitely see why she came out on top among her peers, as she has a pretty interesting story that I won't spoil, and she has to have one of the sickest designs out of any character in the series. Those claws are so cool and make her desk slam animation really stand out. With 26 votes, we only have a single character who really surprised me with how well he performed compared to what I expected, being Lawrence Curls, better known as Mo the Clown. Yeah, I remember Mo being one of the most hated Ace Attorney characters back in the day when I first got into the series, with him being cited as a particularly low point in what was already considered the worst case. However, it seems nowadays people hate Big Top mainly for that other thing, and so I guess people have softened on Mo over the years since he's one of the few characters that doesn't actively contribute to that. But in all seriousness, I can definitely see the charm to Mo, as I think the case does a good job of making him convincingly annoying to the characters, but not to the audience. I find his failed attempts at jokes pretty funny, and I actually like how the judge is so sick of his crap that he starts penalizing Phoenix for pressing him on irrelevant points, therefore extending the time Mo has to be in court. I know that mechanic can definitely be frustrating on a first playthrough, but it doesn't really bother me in the modern day where I basically know the original trilogy like the back of my hand, and I think he has some actually nice, heartfelt moments later in the case. I like how he's genuinely really upset by the Ringmaster's death and ends up taking the mantle by the end. So yeah, I guess Mo is a pretty divisive character in the fandom, but I'm glad a decent number of people like him. Skipping right over 27, our next characters are a trio who all happen to come from Ace Attorney 1, who also all got 28 votes, those being Jake Marshall, Mike Meekins, and Polly the Parrot. I'll just say right off the bat that I'm a pretty big sucker for the gunslinging Wild West cowboy aesthetics, so Jake is definitely one of the coolest characters to me in terms of vibes, which is helped by his funny Western-themed euphemisms for modern stuff, and his musical theme being an absolute banger. Definitely one of my favorite tracks from the first game. Looking beyond the service level, I also really like how deeply the SL9 incident affected him, with him never really being able to get over it and going to extreme lengths to uncover what really went down, and I don't really blame him considering what happened to his brother. While he isn't the absolute standout of 1-5, he does definitely add to that case, having an absolute banger of a supporting cast. Speaking of characters introduced in Rise from the Ashes, we have someone who was certainly an interesting addition to the cast, that being Officer Mike Meekins. Sort of like Mo, Meekins seems like a bit of a divisive character, although I don't really see where the people who really dislike him come from. Like, sure, he's definitely a lot, and the animation with the megaphone is really annoying, but as for his actual character, I can only really see him as harmless at worst. He has that kind of charm to him that can only come from a comically pathetic and down-on-his-luck character getting wrapped up in this big political conspiracy that is 1-5, but really having nothing to do with it, just being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Oh yeah, and he does make cameos in Apollo Justice and Investigations, doesn't he? He certainly does exist in those cases. And then we have Polly the Parrot, who is truly one of the most memorable and iconic parts of the first game and the entire series as a whole. Nothing really encapsulates the raw, ridiculous energy of Ace Attorney, quite like Phoenix winning the case against Von Karma by cross-examining a parrot. It truly is absolute cinema. Skipping over quite a few vote totals, we move on to another trio of characters who all got 32 votes, those being Furio Tigre, Mariah Gorey, and Gregory Edgeworth. I'm not surprised that Tigray ended up being one of the most popular one-off villains, as is a pretty common sentiment that this guy is the huge highlight of an otherwise pretty mid case. Like, I feel like they had to do the evil version of the protagonist trope at some point, but they ended up doing it in the most ridiculous and unsubtle way possible. However, they lean into it so hard that it ends up working anyway. Tigray is an absolute riot, and I love how he uses his brawn and intimidation to get things done while using very little of his brain. I mean, he really just gets away with everything because he's scary and yells at people. Like, it really is so stupid that he got away with impersonating Phoenix, but it's just so funny that I can't bring myself to care. Great stuff. Mariah Gory is a really weird character to me, but not really in a bad way. Her whole deal is just so mysterious because, like, why does she have a different last name than her mom? What happened to her dad? I kind of like that we don't get any straight answers to this stuff. Like I said before, I like when Ace Attorney leaves things up for interpretation like this since they don't do it super often. Either way, Maria is a pretty nice character. I like her quirky personality and her fixation on surgery and medical work, and she has a really neat design with her sick as hell Plague Doctor mask. If we ever get another great Ace Attorney game, I would really love to see more from her, since she only gets to show up in the final 2 cases of the saga. And then we have probably one of the most important characters in the in-universe history of Ace Attorney, Gregory Edgeworth. Sure, I guess he seemed like a cool enough guy based on what we learned about him in the first game, but I'm pretty sure the vast majority of people who voted for him did so for his appearance in Investigations 2. Like, just getting to meet him in person would have been one thing, but actually getting to play as the Gregory Edgeworth is genuinely one of the coolest things the series has ever pulled. And on top of that, he's also just a really nice character to get to play as in his own right. I love how dignified and composed he is, and his design with the big trench coat and fedora is really cool. In particular, I really like how he doesn't immediately write off Manfred von Karma as an evil guy based purely on reputation, and only begins to see him as such once MVK proves that reputation correct. I think that says a lot about Gregory as a character, but through all of that, you really can't ignore that deep feeling of sadness that comes with playing as him, since you know what his fate is going to be, especially when he brings up Miles. Up next, we have the single character who received 33 votes, that being Soseki Natsume. Yeah, I like Soseki. He isn't my absolute favorite out of the recurring Great Ace Attorney characters, but it's never an unpleasant experience when he does show up. I like how just a little quirky and off-kilter he is with his exaggerated and wacky animations, and you can't help but just feel bad for this guy considering all the crap he goes through during his time in London. Like, bro gets accused of attempted murder twice in the span of like 2 days. That has gotta suck. It's nice to see him doing well when he returns to Japan though. I'm happy for him. After him, we have the only character to receive 34 votes, Will Powers. In my mind, Will is kind of the template for typical Ace Attorney defendants, being the somewhat quirky or unusual person, but is still an underdog who's good at heart, and being thrust into an unfortunate situation you want to help them out of. This lines up with Samurai kind of being the first case to really feel like a pure status quo Ace Attorney case. This isn't to say he's bland or generic though. He's an endearing take on the gentle giant archetype, as he's a genuinely emotional and sensitive person despite his looks. I think it's funny how he keeps his face hidden from the public to not shatter the dreams of children. I also like his appearance in Farewell My Turnabout. Even if he isn't in it a ton, it's nice how he does something really nice for Phoenix and Maya, and he does his best to help with the case despite eventually testifying against Matt. I mean, he isn't in the wrong there at all, it's just unfortunate that it makes Phoenix's ordeal harder. Oh, and I guess he also shows up in Investigations too. He's definitely there in that game. Yeah. With 36 votes, we have a duo who definitely has equal amount of story depth and relevance, being Yujin Mikotoba and Missile the dog. Out of the 3 missiles on the list, the Shiba Inu that shows up in the games is definitely the most popular, and well, he is a cute dog, so I suppose he does deserve to get this many votes. I really like the trend of dogs in Shutakumi related media being named after a real-life Pomeranian he had. I don't really have much else to say about Missile, so I'll use the extra time to tell you to play Ghost Trick right now and experience Ghost Trick Missile, who is the best character in all of fiction. And then there's Yujin Mikotoba, who ended up being the focus and one of the coolest reveals in the entire series in my opinion. The way they set up John Watson as the victim of the first case, only for the true Watson of this universe to actually be Susato's father, and a character we've known since day one, is genuinely so peak, and the segment where we actually get to play as him for a little bit during the final case is awesome. I also think he makes for a pretty interesting character, since, while he means well and clearly loves Susato, there are quite a few instances of him not being the greatest father for her. I like how there's some complexity there, since most fathers in Ace Attorney are either the patron saint of fatherhood, or someone who would rather step on a pile of rusty nails than be a positive figure in their child's life. At 37 votes, we have another character who I'm surprised managed to make it decently high, being Wendy Oldbag. Yeah, much like Mo, I guess she's a pretty divisive character, since I know a lot of people absolutely hate her. In the end, I think it comes down to whether or not you find her whiny old lady shtick funny or not. For me personally, I do find her pretty entertaining, as I do find comedy around characters like Phoenix and Edgeworth being picked on by eccentric witnesses to be funny the majority of time. However, one of the big things about her that bothers people the most is her blatant sexual harassment of Edgeworth, which, yeah, I would say is probably my least favorite part of her bits, even if it does lead to objection. Go away! So I guess she's definitely a character that can be hit or miss, but I think she hits for me most of the time. With 38 votes, we have a duo of some morally gray schemers, being Aura Blackwell and Tobias Gregson. Starting with Gregson, he fits in alongside Gumshoe, Emma, and Fulbright as great main detective characters, and having a unique charm to him that makes him stand out. He's definitely the one who takes his job the most seriously, having a very gruff and no-nonsense personality, which makes it even funnier when Iris shows up and he becomes the biggest suck-up in the world, so she depicts him favorably in her stories. Oh, and I love his infinite bag of fish and chips. It makes me hungry whenever I see him eating from it. But on the more serious side of things, he's also very interesting from a moral standpoint with how they expanded on him in the second game. Like, he was fully in on the Reaper conspiracy and was working alongside Strongheart, but I can't really call him a bad guy either, as he more so comes off of someone who meant well at first, but ended up too deep in things to back out. It makes the fact that he helped out Gina and wanted to get her out of the country so much more tragic, since he didn't want that same kind of thing to happen to her. And the fact that he ended up being the victim of the final case is crazy. Like, I think this is the only example in the whole series of a recurring character like him being killed off, which was a huge shock to the system when I first experienced it. So yeah, he's a great character, and I'm glad he got a good number of votes, even though he's definitely the least popular of the main detectives by a pretty large margin. Then there's Aura Blackwell, who has to be one of the best characters exclusive to one case. Or, I guess she technically shows up in 2 cases, since the finale of Dual Destinies is divided into 2 chapters, but whatever. What matters is that she doesn't have a ton of screen time, but makes a very strong impression with what she has. Her past and her relation to Metis is so tragic, especially since she developed such a burning hatred for Athena, and goes to some incredibly drastic lengths to prove what she thinks is the truth. Like, what she did was extremely messed up, but you really can't help feeling bad for her, you know? Oh, and I can't really talk about Aura without bringing up that line. You know, her respect as a coworker wasn't the only thing I wanted. There truly is no heterosexual explanation for that. To be honest, I kind of expected her to get more votes than she did, but I think I just spent a lot of time in places in the fandom that really likes her, so my perception of her popularity was probably skewed by that. But hey, she still managed to do as well as some major recurring characters with the relatively small screen time she has, so I would say she still did pretty well. As our only character who got 39 votes, we have Lotta Hart. Lotta's not a character I think about a whole lot, but yeah, I'm never upset when she shows up, and she actually shows up a lot, playing a somewhat significant role in 5 cases across 3 games, and even makes a small cameo in Investigations 1. I think the thing with her is that she's played as comic relief 100% of the time, and doesn't really have much going on besides that. But I think she works for what she is. I really like how what kind of journalism she's into seems to change with each of her appearances, and I love the through line of Lotta becoming a paranormal photographer in 2-2 after getting a photo of Mia's ghost at the end of Goodbyes. And then after her, we have a duo of one-off killers who got 42 votes, those being Bronco Knight and Mimi Miney. It's a little surprising to see someone like Bronco up so relatively high, since besides the obvious 2 that play much bigger roles later in their games, nearly all of the first case culprits ended up getting little to no votes, but I guess Bronco seemed to stick out in a lot of people's minds, beating out a good number of frequently recurring characters, although he is definitely helped by his connection to a certain other Investigations 2 character, and the importance he ends up having in retrospect even after his death. Oh, and the fact that the killer in the first case ends up as the victim in the second case is a really cool idea. I like how Case 2 fleshes out who would have otherwise been a pretty one-note bad guy, but it's cool seeing that he actually had a close friend like Simeon. It's interesting hearing Simeon talk about him as a friend even though Bronco was a pretty bad guy. It's a situation we really haven't seen much in Ace Attorney. Oh, and the animations he has with his gun are really cool. Probably one of the best animated characters from the 2D era of Ace Attorney. And then there's Mimi, who I'm really glad ended up getting a good number of votes, since she's honestly one of my favorite trilogy culprits, and someone I think is really underrated, sort of like the case she is from. Her whole situation is really tragic and really messed up. I don't really blame her for what she ended up doing to Dr. Gray. I probably would have done the same thing, TBH, he had it coming. In a way, she's kind of the first time they did a tragic villain in Ace Attorney. Oh, and I should also mention that about half of the votes for her came from people who voted for Eenie Meenie, and I just kinda assumed that they were voting for Mimi, so I apologize to any people out there who are actually fans of the real Eenie Meenie whose votes got sent towards Mimi, if you even exist. Alright, we've made it to a very special milestone in the list, the top 50 most popular Ace Attorney characters. I would have liked to keep track of the top 100, but due to the amount of characters who got the same number of votes, it was kind of impossible to have a clean 100 characters. However, from here on out, every character received a unique number of votes, meaning we do have a clean top 50 with no ties. And I think this also marks a point in the list where we're going to be talking about the real big names of the series. Although there still are some relatively less important characters who managed to make it up this high. Anyway, why don't we get started with the 50th most popular Ace Attorney character. With 44 votes, we have Nayuta Sadmati. So, unfortunately, Nayuta ended up performing pretty terribly compared to his contemporaries, since literally all of the other rival prosecutor characters ended up doing extremely well. I mean, considering the reputation he has in the Ace Attorney fandom, I'm not that surprised he ended up as the least favorite among them, but I didn't think it'd be by this much. As for me, yeah, he isn't exactly my favorite either, since he is pretty unpleasant to deal with in court with his repetitive insults and mantras that aren't really balanced out by the charm the other prosecutors usually have. But hey, making it to the top 50 isn't anything to sneeze at. He definitely has his fans, and I do think there's plenty to like. For one, his design and especially his musical theme is some top tier stuff. Regardless of what you think of his writing, he definitely has to be one of the best Ace Attorney characters in terms of aesthetics. Also, I do start to like him a lot more when he does eventually come around in the end and reveal his true colors, even if that feels a little too late in my opinion. But his "A Dragon Never Yields" moment is absolutely legendary, and what he does for Reifa is really sweet. To be honest, I think I would love to see him again in a potential Apollo game set in Kuain, since we'd actually get to spend time with the real Nayuta, who I feel is certainly more pleasant to be around than the version we see for most of Spirit of Justice. Up next, in 49th place with 45 votes, we have the by far most popular character on the list, who does not actually originate from an Ace Attorney game, Professor Herschel Layton. Yes, he and all the other Layton characters who appear in the crossover are legally Ace Attorney characters for the purposes of this list, which makes Layton the 49th most popular character. Man, I love Professor Layton so much, both the character and the game series. If you didn't know, I was actually a Layton fan first, and was only introduced to Ace Attorney through the crossover, so you can kinda thank this guy for this poll even happening at all. So yeah, Layton definitely has to be one of my favorite video game protagonists. He's such a pleasant character to experience these stories through, with him always doing his best to be polite and gentlemanly to everyone he meets. And on top of that, he actually has a really complex and tragic past, despite the friendly face he always strives to keep up. It makes him a really compelling character, and I really encourage everyone watching who hasn't played his games to try them out to see him in action. Hopefully New World of Steam will come out within the next decade, and a new generation can be introduced to his peak puzzle games. At 48th place, with 46 votes, we have who I would say is the scariest and most intimidating Ace Attorney character of them all, Shelly the Killer. God, they did such a good job with this guy. He has this calm, polite demeanor, but the games make it so clear that you do not ever want to mess with this guy. I think the thing that gets me about him is that they never catch him. In both of the games he appears in, he essentially shows up as a force of nature that always gets away in the end. I mean, the entire conflict in Farewell My Turnabout is based around trying to get Maya out of this guy's clutches, which Phoenix is only able to do by breaking off the deal he had with the guy who originally hired him to kidnap her. Oh, and that scene at Enguarde's Manor where you play as Maya, and he just appears out of nowhere, silhouetted from the light behind with that creepy as hell sprite. Scary stuff, man. Honestly, he's probably one of the characters with the most aura in the whole series. I can definitely see why so many people voted for him. Up next in 47th place, we have another Master of Disguise assassin. With 47 votes, we have Callisto Yu, aka Sheena. Right off the bat, I'll say that she definitely deserved to be the final villain of Investigations 1, seeing as she actually has a personal connection to some of the heroes. It was even the main reason they were even here in the first place. But yeah, I think Yu is definitely a cool villain, and I think the way she was executed as a twist culprit was really well done. I mean, if the character wasn't already actively antagonistic, Ace Attorney culprits usually have a big heel-face turn where their personality shifts once you accuse them. However, with Callisto, she really doesn't change much at all. That carefree jokester persona is still there once she's revealed as the culprit, but it comes off as much more sinister under this new light, which I think is a really good way of handling a twist villain. Oh, and I also think it's really cool how you're actually first introduced to her as Sheena in Case 3 without even knowing it. Really cool character, who I wish got the send-off she deserved in the final case. In 46th place, we have another major female character from the Investigations games, and our first character to receive over 50 votes. With 52 votes, we have Verity Gavel. Yeah, neither of the main rivals from the Edgeworth games ended up doing super well compared to their main series counterparts, but I'm still glad they managed to break the 50 vote threshold. I think Verity suffers from a similar problem to Nayuta, where she's an interesting character, but is held back by some poor first impressions. Although the problem isn't nearly as big with her, since her turnaround begins in the 4th case, and not the very end of the finale like with Nayuta. But yeah, I personally think Verity works really well as a rival for Edgeworth, sort of being the embodiment of the philosophy that allowed Miles to get by in his early years as a prosecutor, having absolute faith in the law and not questioning whether or not it can be flawed. It makes for some really compelling stuff thematically, and I like how she eventually begins to see the errors in her beliefs. I also really like the theming in her design and personality, not just being a judge, but also being a sort of priestess for the goddess of law. And her extendable gavel is so cool. I don't care if it's a little silly, this is Ace Attorney we're talking about here. Oh, and her relationship with Sean is so cute, and adds so much to her character. I love the conflict she has in Case 5, where she has her duties as a judge and her duties as a mother pulling against one another. Oh, and when she finally learns that Sean is safe, and she switches back to brutal warrior of the law mode, ready to give Excelsius and Lagarde the punishment they deserve, that honestly has to be one of the coolest and most satisfying moments in either of the Investigations games. So, you know how I said that Shelley the Killer was one of the Ace Attorney characters with the most aura? Well, if I had to choose a first place spot for that category, I would have to go with the character who placed 45th on the poll. With 54 votes, we have Detective Tyrell Bad. Yeah, this guy is just the embodiment of badass, with one of the coolest character designs and music themes in the entire series. But the absolute best part about Detective Bad is the fact that, despite his ultra-serious and grizzled personality and appearance, he's actually a really good guy at heart who will do whatever it takes to do what's right. I love how parts about him you might think are intimidating, like his supposed cigarette and gun in his jacket, just turn out to be a lollipop in a mirror. He does such a great job subverting your expectations. Almost everyone can agree that he's one of the best things to come out of Investigations 1, and I'm glad he's one of the few characters they decided to bring back in the sequel. Speaking of which, I think his role in that game might even beat out the one he has in the original, with him being the detective on the IS-7 incident and helping out Gregory in his investigation. It's so nice seeing him pull strings, not only help Gregory's case, but also just do what he can for Samson, like smuggling in chocolates Judy made for him. Bad is such a peak character all around, and I feel like he should have placed even higher than he already did. Also, I just realized that the past 3 characters have been from the Investigations games. Weird. But I guess that means it's about time to talk about someone from the sequel trilogy instead. In 44th place, with 58 votes, we have someone who I was pleasantly surprised to see do this well, Vera Misham. Yeah, I didn't know she had this kind of following, enough to get her into the top 50 and above some pretty plot-relevant characters, but I can see why she's so likable to a lot of people. She's a highly introverted artist who has trouble expressing herself verbally, which I can assume is probably charming to a lot of people, and something I'm sure a good number of people can relate to with her. I'm not sure how good the representation is, but it's nice that there's a non-verbal character like her in one of these games at all, and it's honestly so sweet seeing her as a kid, talking with Phoenix about how much she likes the Grimoires. She's so innocent there that it hurts. Speaking of which, it's so interesting and tragic to learn about the circumstances she grew up in, and how the adults in her life kind of took advantage of her. Like, I know Drew loves her and everything, but it's definitely a little messed up that he was using her artistic abilities to make forgeries, and that practice ended up resulting in his own death, with the same nearly happening to her. Oh, and Kristoff has got to be one of the most sick and twisted villains in the series, just for what he was planning to do to her, even ignoring all the other stuff he did. To be honest, she's one of the characters I wish we got to see again the most, since I just want to know how she's doing, you know? Can't be easy for her going forward, but it is super sweet seeing how grateful she was to Apollo and Trucy in the end. I'd be totally down for them to bring her back in a future game. After one of the sweetest characters in the series, at 43rd place, we have one who is definitely one of the most evil, that being Matt on Guard, with exactly 60 votes. So, whoever it was that guessed him on that question I tweeted out a while back, I'll get you your $5. But yeah, this guy is honestly just the worst, and the thing that tops it off all of the horrendous crap he does, and it's all for the pettiest reason in the world. His petty feud with Juan Corrida ruined the lives of multiple people that were essentially just tools to them. I don't even want to mention what he did to Maya and Phoenix. But all this just makes him all the better as a villain. I love how the game initially tricks you into a false sense of security with the Magatama not working on him at first, followed up by the game doing everything it can to paint Adrian as a red herring. And you want to believe so badly that it was Adrian too, since it would be so much worse if your client isn't innocent, which starts to twist you up inside during the second investigation, and more doubt starts to seed itself in your mind. So much of the tension from Farewell comes from either not knowing whether this guy actually did it or not, and then once it's revealed, the fact that he's done so much, yet you can't do anything about it, which makes it all the more deliciously satisfying once you're finally able to turn the tables on this guy. The way he just pathetically sweats on the witness stand and begs to be declared guilty feels so good after everything he put you through. Great stuff. Oh, and I can't look at him anymore without thinking about those horrendous brownies. Now we're on to the character who ended up surprising me the most with how well they ended up doing. Like, I knew people liked this guy, but I didn't think they liked him this much. At 42nd place, with 62 votes, we have Wendo Tornado. Yeah, as I was tallying up the votes, it was really surprising me how frequently Wendo's name popped up, but it started to make sense to me as I thought about it. Turnabout Storyteller might be the Ace Attorney case I've seen the biggest turnaround in terms of the general consensus of quality. I remember back when SOJ first came out, people ragged on this case a lot for probably being the most blatant example of filler in the entire series. And to be fair, you could absolutely cut this case out of the game. However, as time has gone on, it feels like people, including me, have begun to look past that and start appreciating it for what it is, and in my opinion, I think this case works so well because of Wendo. I mean, he's who you're cross-examining for about 75% of the case, so he's gotta be an interesting character in order for the case to work at all, really. But yeah, Wendo's a really fun character with expressive animations, a nice theme and design, and there's of course the role he plays in the case, with his DID obviously being the most notable aspect of his character. And from what I know, they actually handled his condition really well here, at least a lot better than other media has, looking at you, Danganronpa. I actually spoke with a few Ace Attorney fans who actually have DID, and from what they told me, they actually tackle the subject in a fairly respectful way that doesn't treat it like a joke, especially in regards to Owen. I think the only issues they brought up were just some outdated terminology and some aspects of the condition being a bit exaggerated, which I suppose comes with the territory in Ace Attorney. I especially like how the case subverts the whole evil serial killer alter thing, which is just a really tired and harmful trope. So it's refreshing to see them actively avoid and treat the subject as a whole with as much respect as they did. Really cool character, and I'd love to see him again in a future game. Up next, we have another character from Spirit of Justice who I'm a pretty big fan of. In 41st place, with 65 votes, we have Princess Raifa Padma Kurain. Yeah, Raifa is definitely a character I think doesn't get nearly enough appreciation as she deserves, as I think her character was done really well throughout most of SOJ, and I would pretty confidently call her my favorite character from that game. I do think she suffers from a bit of a bad first impression, joining in with the heckling Phoenix receives in Case 1, but once we get to Case 3, she shoots up in likability. Since Maya is in jail for most of it, Raifa basically ends up being your main companion throughout the investigations, and her dynamic with Phoenix is really funny and charming, with her slowly warming up to him, and the events of the case eventually starting her down her character arc in Case 5. And man, she's so great in Case 5, having her whole reality around her country and her role in it being completely shattered. That scene where she's struggling to keep it together, or even just breathe, has to be one of the most upsetting in the series, which is really sold by her animations. And then you feel so proud of her for finally standing up to Garon, and man, she's just so good. I would absolutely love to see her return in another game, where we not only get to see her on her path to becoming Kurain's new ruler, but also to see her relationship with Nayuta grow now that she knows about their connection. Starting off our top 40, we have who might be the most recurring character in the entire series, second only to Phoenix himself. In 40th place, with 66 votes, we have the Judge. I don't really think about this guy too much, but yeah, he really is a huge cornerstone of the series, appearing in nearly every case across the main games. With him showing up so often, he has a lot of great moments from across the series. Just off the top of my head, some of my favorites include the time where he thinks Phoenix is trying to hire the killer to assassinate him, the time he instantly gets to a game over if Phoenix accuses him of hiding Mac's bust in Big Top, and in Apollo Justice when he finds out that nail polish is a thing that exists and his wife's fingernails are not naturally red. And even though he's presented as a comedic character the majority of the time, he also has some great genuine moments too. Like, I absolutely love the scene near the end of Bridge to the Turnabout, where he talks about how each one of his cases is different, and how it's important to learn new things and gain new perspectives to understand the world around us. Oh, and then at the end of Zach Grimari's trial in Apollo Justice, it's honestly a little cool to see him become deathly serious and treat what Phoenix did with a lot of weight, even if it results in the absolute worst for Phoenix. So yeah, I really like the old guy, even if he ends up fading to the back a lot of the time. It really isn't a mainline Ace Attorney game without him, is it? Up next, we have our first great Ace Attorney character in the top 50. In 39th place, with exactly 70 votes, we have Iris Wilson, or Watson, depending on which version of the game you're playing. To be honest, I feel Iris here has got to be one of the best executions of the child genius concept I've ever seen, since she still feels like a child. I feel like something you'll often see with this trope is that the kid is written to basically just be an adult with the appearance of a child. But with Iris, even though she's incredibly intelligent and is a tad more mature than other people her age, she's still convincingly written as a child, and I think this makes for a very fun character and dynamic she has with the rest of the cast. Her relationship with Ryunosuke, Susato, and Sholmes are all so cute, and I love when she ends up as your assistant in Susato's place a few times. Also, the whole mystery surrounding her father is really interesting too. As for most of the story, there's this big elephant in the room around John Wilson being the victim in the first case, and nobody wants to bring it up with Iris, so you're left with that hanging over your head the whole time. But then 2-4 rolls around, and your whole understanding of the situation gets flipped on its head. The whole scene where Yujin is revealed to be Sholmes' actual original partner is so good, due to all the drama and new questions that arise. And then you finally find out where Iris actually came from, and the answer is even more tragic than when you thought Wilson was her father, and then when she starts calling Sholmes her dad, oh man, that was so adorable. So yeah, Iris is a really fun and cute character, and I'd love to see more from her in another game, especially if we get to see more of her relationship with Barok now that he knows they're related. Up next in 38th place, we have another great Ace Attorney character, and someone who surprised me with how well he performed. With 72 votes, it's Enoch Drebber. Just off the bat, I have to say this guy absolutely has one of the best sets of animations in the entire series. Just watching this guy with his exaggerated yet robotic movements is honestly mesmerizing a lot of the time, helped by his really cool character design. He's already by far one of the most memorable and standout great Ace Attorney villains just based on this, and he's also a really interesting character on top of that. I like how he's a scumbag who you can also feel a little bad for as you learn about how Odie Asman screwed him over. Most Ace Attorney killers kinda either commit to full evil villain or full sympathetic, but it's interesting how Drebber kind of rides the line between the two. To be honest, while I do definitely like him a lot, I am definitely surprised that he managed to get this high in the polls, even higher than Iris, who's one of the big main characters of the Great Ace Attorney. If you're someone who voted for him, let me know why in the comments, as I'm really curious to see what about him specifically made him a favorite for so many people. Oh, and since Great Ace Attorney 2 introduced such a small number of brand new characters compared to the usual, Enoch has the honor of being the most popular character from that game. Moving back over to investigations for a bit for our 37th spot, we have the other main rival from those games, Agent Shilong Lang, who received 74 votes. While I personally prefer Verity as a rival, I can definitely see why a lot of people really like this guy. He just has a really fun energy and personality that clashes well with Edgeworth. To be honest, I kind of have a hard time taking his whole tough guy alpha wolf persona super seriously, with me thinking it's more funny than cool, but that honestly just makes me like him more. And I love how he's actually really nice to his subordinates and treats them well, despite what you might think based on his general attitude. I think the main problem I have with this guy is that he just doesn't get enough screen time in his own game. Like, he doesn't show up until Case 3 of Investigations 1, and then only has a tiny cameo in Case 4, so by the time we get to the final case, it's only his second major appearance in the game. It makes it so his whole arc doesn't really get the time to breathe, and he doesn't really hit as hard as he could have as a rival. Because of that, it only makes it so his best appearance is in Investigations 2, where he only shows up for the final case, but he does great with the limited screen time he has there. I really like how he's still at Edgeworth's throat a lot of the time, but also clearly respects him now. I love the dynamic those two have there. Oh, and his theme song is really good. I forgot to mention that. Up next in 36th place, we have who claimed the title of the most popular character original to Spirit of Justice. With 75 votes, we have Dirk Sadmahi. Man, Dirk is just the best, isn't he? I mean, I don't see him talked about super often, but I don't think I've ever seen someone say they disliked Dirk. So it makes total sense to me that he ended up being the most popular of the new guys from SOJ. I love how the game builds him up as this ruthless criminal, only for that narrative to be slowly peeled back as you learn more about the rebels and their cause. And then when he just shows up at the agency, it's such a shock to the system, which is only furthered by the fact that he's just this genuinely nice guy who wants to hang out with his surrogate son that he hasn't seen in years. It's so nice seeing him and Apollo interact and bond throughout the final case. I really commend the writing for managing to have Dirk be so likable and have so much impact despite technically playing a role in just this one case. Sure, that case is like 12 hours, but still, and that final plot twist around him near the end is insane. The fact that he was dead before the case even started and was being channeled by Maya the entire time is so crazy, and yet so tragic too. The moment where Apollo finds out and slams his head against his desk has got to be one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the entire series. Up next in 35th place, with 78 votes, we have the second Iris on our list.
Sister Iris of Hazakura Temple.
Iris, like Dirk, is a character exclusive to the final case of her game, but still clearly managed to make a big impact on people. The game definitely does a good job of building suspense around her, since you just don't know whether to trust her or not throughout the beginning of the case, making you question whether or not this girl could be Dahlia. Speaking of Dahlia, I think Iris's relationship with her and how they contrast is really interesting. Even though they came from the same place and even have the same face, they ended up growing up in very different environments and thus ended up leading very different lives. And I like how, despite everything, Iris never ends up thinking less of Dahlia. She still loves her no matter what, and seems to be the only person who really understands her, which is an aspect of Iris's character I really enjoy. And yeah, I'm not much of a Fenris person, but I do have to admit that her relationship with Phoenix is really cute. I would have really loved to see her return in some way to see her relationship with both him and Pearl expanded upon, but Ace Attorney games unfortunately just aren't allowed to spoil each other, and Iris' entire existence is basically a spoiler, so I doubt we'll ever get to see that. While we're on a roll with one-off defendant characters, let's talk about the one who earned the 34th slot on the list. With 79 votes, we have Lana Skye.
Okay, so Kara from like 4 months in the future here. At some point, most of the audio for Lana's segment ended up getting really messed up, and I had to throw pretty much all of it out. So if you're wondering why this segment specifically sounds so different from the rest of the video, that's why. Honestly, considering how popular she is within the spaces I hang out in within the Ace Attorney fandom, I often forget that she only shows up in Rise from the Ashes, and it's unfortunate that she ends up in prison by the end, because I feel like she would have popped up again considering how prominent Emma ends up becoming. But regardless, I do agree with everyone that voted for her that she's a great character. She's really the first example of a defendant who is actively difficult to work with, and even intends to be found guilty, with only Emma there to push you to defend her. It creates a really interesting tension to the case, since you're never really too sure about whether she actually did it or not, and even if she didn't, there's still the mystery of why she's confessing to it. While she's very cold to you at first, I think the final chapters of the case really endear you to her, as you learn about what she did during the SL9 incident and why. It's really heartbreaking to see, but then you get that moment at the end where you finally see her smile, and then she and Emma hug, and you see the photo of them when they were young, and it's all so good, man. Oh, and I can't really discuss Lana without mentioning the intellectually attracted line. Despite what Emma might say, I think we all know what Lana and Mia were getting up to in college. Now, before we move on from Lana, I've actually got another special guest here to give us our thoughts on her. Everyone, let's welcome in Sparky.
Rise from the Ashes is one of my favorite cases in the entire series for a good reason, and I feel like Lana Skye is a huge part of that. Even though she only appears in that singular case, which wasn't even originally in the first game, she still left a mark on me since. She's such a tragic character, a woman who wants nothing more than for her little sister to be safe and happy, who has to after their parents died, suddenly faced with her sister being potentially framed for murder and her being blackmailed and manipulated by Gant for years to prevent that forever happening. She loves Emma too much to let something like that happen to her. I don't know, I just think she's a fascinating character overall, and the role she serves in the overarching narrative of Rise from the Ashes is so insanely fascinating.
Right off the heels of talking about one of the most serious and complex characters in the series, let's talk about someone who is the opposite of that. In 33rd place, with exactly 80 votes, we have Larry Butt. To be honest, I kind of expected him to make it a bit higher, since he always feels like a pretty major character in my head, but I guess he doesn't show up that often, and isn't someone I really see people talking about that much. But hey, 33rd still isn't anything to sneeze at, so clearly a lot of people still like him. As for me, I would definitely say that Larry is at his best during the first game in Turnabout Goodbyes. I feel like there is where he's at his most harmless and funny, and he actually really comes in clutch during court, with his last-minute testimony saving the day during Day 2. As for the rest of the series, I think he's fine enough, but I don't really like how his entire character seems to be hyper-focused on his love life, and it kind of feels like his friends seem to hate him despite him, Phoenix, and Edgeworth kind of being presented as a trio in Game 1. It all feels very weird to me, especially since in SOJ, they apparently hadn't seen him in the decade since Game 3, but hey, I think Larry still manages to be pretty funny most of the time despite all that. I think people are way too mean to him about his art. He actually makes some good stuff, and yet Phoenix and Edgeworth crap on it all the time. I'm glad he managed to find his calling and is still pursuing it after the time skip, even if he's still really weird around women. In 32nd place, with 81 votes, we have another character who I expected to get a little higher, that being none other than Eddie Fender. Man, Eddie was such a cool addition, not just as a character in Investigations 2, but for the lore and history of Ace Attorney as a whole. Like, yeah, what if Gregory Edgeworth had a Maya-style assistant? How would he be doing now, and how would he feel about Miles? It's so interesting seeing someone consistently acknowledge Edgeworth's past and history like Eddie does, and I love the dynamic the two of them end up having. He's basically Edgeworth's cool uncle. Something I also find interesting about him is the difference in his characterization between the game's official localization and the fan translation, since in the fan version, and I'm guessing the original Japanese, his general womanization and flirtiness is a lot more prominent, which kind of made me not like him as much when I first played the game. However, a lot of that was toned down in the official version, which bolstered my opinion of him by a lot. Also, I have to mention his theme song of Joking Motive, which has to be one of the best songs in any of these games. It's so good. Anyway, yeah, Eddie's just a really cool and interesting character, and I'm glad the Ace Attorney team thought to introduce someone like him. Alright, we've hit the part of the list where the number of votes each character received is going to be going up by a pretty exponential rate. Like, we've only been having skips of about 2 or 3 recently, but these gaps are going to start getting pretty big pretty soon. Up next, we have someone who maybe didn't end up as the most popular Ace Attorney villain, but who is definitely the most iconic and influential in the series. In 31st place, with 87 votes, we have Manfred von Karma. God, where do I even begin with this guy? It's crazy how much impact his actions have on the entire history of the series. The DL6 incident is the root of so much of the conflict in this series, which ends up extending out to the Apollo Justice and Investigations games too, all of it stemming from this one moment where Von Karma shot Gregory in that elevator. Even though he's arrested and presumably dies after the first game, his presence still lingers over the heads of everyone he affected, especially Miles and Franziska. I think it says a lot how he's the one villain that is consistently brought up even after his game, and even makes flashback appearances in both Investigations games, and even when you meet him in the present day, he's still one of the most powerful and intimidating enemies you go up against in the series, seemingly having the whole courtroom under his thumb. If you felt like an underdog before, going up against him makes you feel like an ant trying to fight off a boot hovering over your head. Even though his evil is pretty uncomplicated, and he gets a lot of exposure throughout the series, Von Karma still manages to be one of the most fascinating villains in the series to me. Unlike a lot of the villains in the same league as him, his motives aren't really about power or influence. Instead, he's driven by the most extreme perfectionism I've ever seen in a character. Like, he killed a man over a single penalty. Not even a loss, a penalty. And he ends up instilling that same perfectionism into his students, which cannot be good for the psyche at all.
In the end, I think he also has one of the most satisfying breakdowns in the series, with him slamming his head into the wall over and over. There's actually something seriously wrong with this guy, and I love it. Now we've made it to the top 30, and to start us out, our 30th and 29th place characters have got to be two of the most surprising higher rankings on the entire poll. Like, I was definitely aware that these two were well liked, but I was still really shocked with how well they did, considering they both only come from a single case, and there are many very important and prominent characters ranked below them. Let's begin with the slightly less popular of the two. In 30th place, with 96 votes, we have the original Mask to Mask, Ron Delight. Yeah, it's really funny to me that this guy ended up beating out Manfred von Karma of all people and blocked him from making it to the top 30. But yeah, I guess Ron really ended up standing out to people, and I can see why. It's such a fun concept to have this flashy, over-the-top phantom thief who has the entire city's attention turn out to be this little, meek, introverted guy who has a really hard time getting people to notice him. It's such a great contrast and has you constantly wondering whether this guy actually is Mask to Mask or not. And the thing is, despite your first impression of him, Ron is really good at what he does. Like, he did manage to steal all those artifacts and got away with them too. Even if most of those heists were planned by someone else, it still requires a lot of talent to execute all that. And then when he tries to get himself declared guilty of stealing the urn to give himself an alibi for Bullard's murder, that was a genuinely really smart plan, and it may have had even more layers to it with that reveal at the end that he can't be tried again due to double jeopardy. Like, Ron did steal the urn, but he just got away with it? If that was part of his plan too, then he may actually be a genius. Oh, and his relationship with Desi is so sweet. They contrast and complement each other so well, and it's so cute how she fell for him after saving her from a mugging by yelling and crying at the criminals so much they got freaked out and ran. They have a very similar vibe to Roger and Jessica Rabbit to me. So yeah, Ron is another character where I'm curious to hear from the folks who voted for him. I'd really like to know what made him stand out to so many people. And up next, we have the other underdog I mentioned earlier, who not only made the top 30 in 29th place, but is also our first character to receive over 100 votes. Yep, we were really close to the top 30 being everyone who hit that milestone, but Ron was just a few votes short, unfortunately. Anyway, with 108 votes, we have the ace detective himself, Luke Atme. Yep, both of these guys ended up being from the very same case. Anyway, I think Atme has a very similar appeal and style of villainy as Furio Tigre. Like, they are not subtle at all about this guy being the villain, and because of that, they could make him as ridiculously entertaining as they wanted with how egotistical and over-the-top he is. The best way I could describe him is as an evil version of Papyrus from Undertale. His character design is also great and extremely fitting for what they were going for. I love his monocle, which is also a magnifying glass, and his nose is obviously magnificent. And even after all that, they actually do some interesting things with him in the story. That unsubtle villainy I was talking about is actually part of his plan, as his true goal is to be found guilty for stealing the urn to give himself an alibi for the murder that happened at the same time, the latter of which he was actually guilty for. There's so much misdirection here that it actually does make the mystery around the seemingly obvious villain interesting to figure out. I love how he uses the same monologue when he's finally caught for both his real and fake crime, with the meaning of it changing completely now that you know his whole story. So yeah, this guy is a really charming and fun villain, and I can see why he ended up making it so high. It was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. And before we move on, let's hear from our next special guest about their thoughts on the great detective. It's Yellow Jester.
I love Luke Atme because he's boastful and he's very full of himself, but he's not like mean to the main cast. Whenever he talks to you, he likes talking to you. Most of the other culprits will be like, get out of my face, stop trying to talk to me. But he's like, oh yeah, let's talk. You guys are lawyers and spirit mediums, that's cool. I'm a detective, that's cool. He's very full of himself, but he's not mean. His design is elegant, but it's also kind of goofy. His theme is very detective-y, but it also has an old-timey video game sounds to it. I think one of the most interesting things about them that sets him apart to me for a lot of other minor Ace Attorney villains is he's not really putting up a facade. Like, he's performing, but he's also being authentic to himself. He only really breaks character, and I use that term kind of hesitantly whenever Phoenix outs him as a blackmailer, but I think that's less him breaking character and more just him getting angry. A lot of other minor Ace Attorney characters seem to be living their life as a facade, which is kind of odd to me that they'd be constantly living in a facade. Like, I get they're putting up a character to seem innocent when they're accused of murder, but like they're always just kind of doing that anyway, which seems a little odd to me. But look at him, he's not putting up a character. He's living his authentic self. He's just a wacky guy. And he's also very clever. He sets up one of the most cool layered mysteries in the series. And I love his dynamic with Godot. And I love his planning and his design. I just love everything about him.
Up next, we have another detective who has a very similar, eccentric, and enthusiastic energy, just on the complete opposite side of the morality spectrum. Well, kind of. In 29th place, with 109 votes, it's Bobby Fulbright. Haha, what a completely normal and well-meaning detective, right guys? There's definitely no dark secrets hiding here. But yeah, in all seriousness, talking about this guy is kind of hard because of that pretty big elephant in the room. That is the fact that we never actually got to meet the real Bobby Fulbright. He was killed a whole year before the game takes place and got replaced by the Phantom, which is an absolutely insane twist, by the way. Maybe the most shocking reveal Ace Attorney has ever pulled before. But yeah, for now I'm going to be talking about the Phantom's Fulbright persona as if he's a separate person, since, like I explained in the segment on the Phantom, it's presumably an accurate impersonation of the real Fulbright. Anyway, I think this guy's just a blast to see in action. I definitely miss Emma in Dual Destinies, but I see Fulbright as a pretty worthy substitute. In very stark contrast to his predecessor, he's just brimming with so much passion and enthusiasm for his work, which is perfectly complemented by him being a little bit, airheaded. This creates a very entertaining dynamic with Blackwell, since those two really couldn't be more different from one another. And Fulbright just has so many hilarious and endearing moments too, like when Filch steals his shoes without him even noticing, and that one moment where he pops up in the window in Turnabout Academy. And of course, this all serves to make the final twist shock and hurt you even more. Amazing stuff. I hope the people who voted for Fulbright and or the Phantom aren't too mad at me for how I handled sorting their votes, since I imagine quite a few people's votes didn't exactly end up going where they wanted. But like I said, there were enough people who specified one but not the other, where I felt this was the only way I could have done it. And in the end, even if I added all the votes together, he only would have passed up the next character in the ranking. Speaking of which, let's move on to our 27th most popular character. With 115 votes, we have Damon Gant. So in the greater Ace Attorney community, I know Rise from the Ashes has been a pretty divisive case, even if I've seen opinion on it skew more towards the positive side in recent years. However, even among the people who hate the case, its main villain is someone I've seen near universal praise for. Because yeah, I have to agree that this guy is one of Ace Attorney's all-time great villains. I love how his demeanor comes off as friendly and upbeat on the surface level, but is still incredibly intimidating at the same time, and it's great that his personality really never drops even as his villainy is revealed, as opposed to a lot of other culprits that have a heel-face turn. It makes it so that he works as both a charming and funny character, but as a menacing villainous one too. Just the way he stares at you for seconds at a time without saying anything. It's so goofy, but also creepy at the same time, depending on the context. I think he adds a lot to the game thematically too. As the game points out, Gant's intentions were good when he first started out, but his ideals slowly became corrupted over time as he started to believe in going to extreme lengths to punish criminals until he became the corrupt politician we see him as in the modern day. It shows what Edgeworth or even Phoenix could have become if they didn't go through the development they ended up having during the trilogy. So yeah, I was not surprised at all to see him this high, even though he only shows up in the one case. Now, let's shift gears from one of the most evil characters in the series over to the one who might be the most innocent of them all. In 26th place, with 128 votes, we have Pearl Fay. Yeah, even though she's still placed very high, I kind of expected her to be up even higher on the list. Pretty much all of the big names from the original trilogy are among some of the highest placed characters in the poll, but Pearly here didn't even scrape the top 25. Anyway, regardless of her placement, it's clear there are a lot of people who are big fans of Pearl, and it's easy to see why. I mean, to start off, she's just an adorable little kid. I feel like there's gotta be something twisted and sinister about your heart if you don't like Pearl. It's really cute seeing how she interacts with the world around her compared to the grown-up characters, and her extreme innocence and naivete is funny, but also a little sad when you think about how aggressively she was sheltered by her mother. In general, it's honestly so tragic seeing how Pearl feels about her mother after Reunion and Turnabout, since it's clear that Pearl still loves and cares about her despite the fact that Morgan's love for her is clearly purely conditional, and she only sees her as a tool in the end.
Like, Morgan was obviously awful already, but what she tried to manipulate Pearl into doing in Bridge genuinely might place her as the most evil character in the series. I'm serious. Anyway, it's a really complicated and messed up situation that makes you appreciate how sweet Pearl still ends up being despite everything she's been through. I would have loved to see how she grappled with her feelings about her mother as she got older. Speaking of which, Pearl certainly does appear in the 3DS games. I feel bad about it, but I kind of forget she's in these most of the time. But also, they really don't give her that much to do at all, which sucks, because I really want to see how she's doing, you know? We're told that she was friends with Trucy as they both grew up, but we never actually see them interact. It's a serious missed opportunity, and something I hope we get to see in a future game. Starting off the top 25, we have another character introduced in Justice for All, and a character I was very happy to see make it up this high, since she's one of my personal favorites. In 25th place, with 129 votes, we have Adrian Andrews. As I said before, I love Adrian, and she has got to be one of, if not my favorite side character from across the series, since I feel she has some of the most depth out of any of the characters who only play a major role in one case, and I'm glad a lot of people seem to agree. If I voted on the poll, she'd be another one of my 5 picks. I love how the game specifically uses your experience with Turnabout Samurai to really mess with your expectations around her. The killer in Samurai was your defendant's female boss, who seemed to have a cold, cool, and collected attitude. Well, what do you know? Seems like it's the same situation here. But as the case goes on, you see her mask slowly stripped back more and more, with you learning that she's actually a very vulnerable and emotional person who feels like she needs to shield herself with a cold persona to get by in her industry. It really makes you seriously doubt whether accusing her is really the right thing to do, despite how desperately you don't want Matt to be the killer. It really adds to the masterful tension that Farewell My Turnabout has that I talked about before with On Guard. And man, you feel so bad for her when you learn about what Matt and Juan did to her in Celeste. Honestly, some of the most tragic and disturbing stuff in the whole series, in my opinion. That conflict you have between saving her or Maya is really intense, and much like Lana, it's so satisfying to see her finally genuinely smile in the end after you're able to save both her and Maya and get Matt the guilty verdict. It's also really nice to see her again in the third game where we get to see how she's doing. I think they knew what they had with Adrian, since she and Maggie are the only side characters from JFA that got brought back for this one. Up next, we have another one of my favorite characters from the original trilogy, and my personal favorite villain in the series. In 24th place, with 148 votes, it's Dahlia Hawthorne. Personally, Dahlia is a really interesting character to talk about, because I think a lot of the depth and intrigue you can read from her character is kind of in active contradiction to the narrative the game is trying to push with her. Like, there's a lot you could read into her in regards to nature versus nurture, with her honestly having a pretty awful childhood with a complete lack of loving parental figures, which taught her to always act in her own self-interest. And there's the whole situation with Terry, which I really do not feel like getting into since there's a whole lot of discourse surrounding that topic. All of this is to say that there's potentially a lot more to Dahlia than the pure evil devil child narrative the game ultimately does with her, and I encourage you to read into it yourself. Anyway, regardless of all that, I do think Dahlia also works very well in the role the game has placed her into, too. She's really the first example of a recurring villain who you meet multiple times throughout a game, and I like how in Turnabout Beginnings, our perspective compared to Mia's is flipped compared to how it was in Memories, with us knowing who Dahlia is while Mia doesn't, which is the opposite of the first case. I also love her whole aesthetic and vibe, with her pastel design and serene music that ends up feeling more and more sinister as the game goes on. While I enjoy her appearances in Case 1 and 4, I think she's at her absolute best in Case 5, where we really get to see her character dissected. This is where she really gets to let loose and let go of that facade of innocence she usually puts on. I love that animation where she plays with her hair, and one of my favorite scenes in the whole case is that one testimony where she tears into her mother, which is absolutely deserved, all things considered. And in the end, she has one of the coolest breakdowns in the entire series, and almost certainly the coolest in the original trilogy. Even though she's been completely defeated, she wasn't going to go out without giving us one last piece of incredibly sinister imagery. So yeah, like I said, Dahlia has to be one of my favorite Ace Attorney villains, and characters in general. And while she wouldn't be among the 5 I voted for, she's definitely somewhere in my top 10. Up next, in 23rd place, we have another one of Ace Attorney's most popular villains. With exactly 150 votes, we have Simeon Saint. You know how I said the Phantom's true identity was one of the most shocking reveals in the series? Well, Simeon turning out to be the big mastermind responsible for almost everything that happens in Investigations 2 has to give it a run for its money.
I feel like Simeon has to be one of the coolest Ace Attorney villains just for that alone, as it's so interesting seeing how each of the game's cases ended up tying together, and how he had a hand in almost all of them, all while he sat in the background while no one suspected a thing. To be honest, Ace Attorney doesn't usually go for the huge, big, surprise culprit reveal, with most of them having a lot of build-up to them that makes them easy to see coming eventually, but when they actually pull it off, it usually pays off quite handsomely like with Simeon. Now, even outside of the reveal, Simeon is still a very interesting character in his own right. Just on aesthetic level, he definitely fits the evil clown archetype that the Ace Attorney series was sorely lacking up till that point, with his amazing, albeit limited animations doing a great job of selling that theme. Oh, and his character theme, the man who masterminds the game, has to be one of my absolute favorites in the whole series. Definitely the best villain theme in my opinion. And then from a writing perspective, I like how he's the ultimate conclusion to the various forms of corruption and abuse we've seen throughout the game, resulting in someone like him who felt completely alone and at the mercy of a corrupt system that was out to get him, which pushed him to do what he did. I think my only problem with Simeon as a character is that he maybe feels a little too sympathetic, weirdly enough, as I don't think the game made me see him as evil as it wanted me to. Like, at the very least, he's certainly the least hateable out of all the villains in the game, and I guess he does suffer from a bit of what I'd call twist villain syndrome, where the reveal that he's the bad guy comes so late that he doesn't get a lot of time at all to actually be the bad guy, you know? But regardless, I think they still did a great job with this guy in the end. He was certainly a big improvement over the final villain from the last game. Taking a break from villains for a bit, let's talk about the character who made it to the 22nd spot in the ranking. With 168 votes, it's Gina Lestrade, who I'm really glad to see up this high. Even though she didn't beat the big five from Great Ace Attorney, it's nice that so many people appreciate Gina all the same, since I would probably pick her as my personal favorite from those games. On top of just having a really charming personality, she has one of the most fleshed out and well-defined character journeys in the entire series. I love seeing her start out as this girl on the streets who's really defensive and mistrustful of others in Case 3, who you yourself have a hard time trusting due to her working with McGilded. But then she ends up as your defendant in Case 5, which ends up doing so much for her character. That moment in the defendant lobby where she ends up breaking down and crying a little after Iris and Ryunosuke tell her how much they value and trust her has to be one of the most heartwarming moments in the game. And then when we get to see her again in the second game, it's so nice to see Gregson taking her under his wing and training her to be a detective. I remember audibly saying to myself that I was so proud of her on my first playthrough. I love seeing her so enthusiastic and upbeat compared to how she was in the first game. But then, all this makes it all the more heartbreaking when we learn what happens to Gregson. It's actually so sad watching Gina try to grapple with his death and see her desperately try to defend him when the truth about what he did as a part of the Reaper conspiracy starts to come out. All in all, Gina just has so many great moments and a great arc that makes her one of the most standout characters in a pair of games that already has an amazing cast. Now, how about we shift back to talking about villains? In fact, in 21st place, we have who ended up being the highest ranking villain out of all of them, and one I think definitely deserved the spot despite his relatively small screen time. With 173 votes, we have Christoph Gavin. Yeah, I wonder if this placement will stir up any controversy, since, from what I remember, Christoph here is a bit of a divisive character, but still ended up being the most voted for villain in the series. However, as I implied earlier, I love Christoph, and he's a very close second behind Dahlia for being my favorite Ace Attorney bad guy. Similar to Manfred von Karma, probably the most interesting thing about him to me is his motivation. The fact that he did so much to ruin so many people over something as petty as getting turned down by a big potential client. To me, Christoph's defining trait is his ego, his belief that he's the only one truly worthy to practice in the gilded halls of law. So it makes sense to me that getting turned down by someone as famous as Zach Ramari in favor of Phoenix Wright would drive him crazy. And then, even after stripping Phoenix of his badge and career, Christoph's deep paranoia drove him to keep going, making sure to keep tabs on everyone involved, and even trying to murder the 12-year-old girl that made the forged evidence for him. I think the fact that he keeps this eerily calm and collected persona on at all times until the very end, despite everything he's done and the insane things going on in his head, is what makes him one of the scariest and most fascinating villains in the series to me. Like, I think he himself doesn't even believe that he's some evil maniac, instead thinking that everything he does is for some calculated, justified reason. However, the fact that his motivation for killing Zack is kept behind black psych locks tells me that his true motive is something even he himself doesn't want to accept. That seeing Zack, the man who sent him down this path in the first place, sent him into such a blind rage it drove him to almost immediately kill him. Some people ask why he cares that much about being caught for Drew's murder if he's already in prison, but my take on it is that he's trying to protect his reputation rather than his innocence. Even though he was caught for murder, he still kept up that mystique and calm demeanor, and his motivation was never explained, so I imagine a lot of people still thought of him as the coolest defense in the West. But after Case 4, everything he is has been laid out for everyone to see, and even the court system he put on such a pedestal is being broken down before his eyes, all because of Phoenix Wright. It makes sense to me that he would break down after that, and what a breakdown it is. It's easily one of the most iconic and insane breakdowns in the whole series. I adore that moment where he finally snaps and stares you down with that twisted, angry expression. And then that moment where they describe how he cackled to himself as they walked him down the halls of the courthouse is honestly so chilling. I wouldn't say he's perfect, obviously. I think he suffers from not getting as much exposure as he needed, and I regularly forget that he was Apollo's boss at one point, since the relationship wasn't expanded on very much. But even still, I think everything I've said makes him one of Ace Attorney's most compelling villains in my eyes, and easily worthy of taking the #1 spot among the series' rogues gallery. Alright everybody, we've made it to the top 20 most popular Ace Attorney characters, the true icons of the series. From here on out, we'll be talking about the biggest of the big names, with each of them playing a major role in at least one of the games. We're fully outside the realm of surprise, side, or one-off characters now. At 20th place, we have the least popular of the main rival prosecutors that aren't Nayuta Sadmahi. With 191 votes, it's the Reaper of the Old Bailey, Barak Van Zieks. Yeah, I wasn't kidding when I said all the rivals besides Nayuta were very high on the list, with not a single one missing the top 20. Anyway, can I just say that even just based on aesthetics alone, Van Zieks has got to be one of the coolest characters in the series. His design is sick, fully appealing to the side of me that loves that Victorian Gothic look. His animations are amazing too, like when he swirls around and smashes the wine glass, tosses the bottle, or even slams his whole damn leg on the prosecutor's bench to avoid spilling it. And god, his theme song. Like, I've brought up music quite a bit in this video, but if I had to pick a #1 favorite character theme in the series, there's a pretty good chance this guy would take it. His theme is so good that I ended up using it as the theme of the main villain of a D&D campaign I ran. Now, I probably could go on Barak some more, but I have a special guest who'd like to cover that for me. Now, take it away, Stelle.
Hey, I'm Stelle, commonly known as Lesbian Vanlock on Twitter, and I'm here to explain why I voted Barak Van Zieks as my favorite character in this popularity poll. Most people don't like Barak for good reasons, the racism, but when I was playing the Great Ace Attorney, I was just drawn to him. I thought there was something more to his character, which I was right about. During the Great Ace Attorney 2, specifically the third case, Return of the Great Departed Soul, we start to learn about the tragedy of the Professor case, which Barak was directly involved in. His brother, Clint, was the final victim, and the culprit was Genshin Esog, a close friend. Not only do we learn about this case, but it comes back to haunt us in the fourth case with the murder of Gregson, when Barak is the main suspect. Something about Barak in 2-4 made me feel truly bad, specifically when Ryunosuke asked to defend him. At first, he flat out says no and doesn't let Ryunosuke argue back, but after some convincing, he lets him defend him. This is also when Barak mentions that he has been hesitant to trust anyone or let anyone get close since the Professor case, and how he fears betrayal. Barak's relationship with other characters are also one of the most interesting things about him. He clearly cares about his friends and family, how he idolized Clint and how he prosecuted Harebrain's case, but he also has semi-implied relationships, specifically with Herlock, as they both mention knowing each other in a way that seems to be just beyond just hearing about each other. All this made me realize how complex and great of a character and a rival Barak is, and how he is a great morally great character and is personally my favorite in the entire series. I need to stop yapping now, but thank you for having me.
Similar to the main rival prosecutors, another very popular archetype in the poll was the main female assistant character. Unfortunately, there has to be a least popular among them, but at least she made it up to the top 20. In 19th place, with 225 votes, we have the second great thief, Yatagarasu, Kay Faraday. Yeah, Kay is our first character to receive over 200 votes, and once again, it would have been so satisfying to have the top 20 be all the characters with at least that many, but no. Anyway, I've always had somewhat conflicting feelings about Kay. I do think she's fun and likable like her contemporaries, but something about her whole thief gimmick always felt a little off to me. like it was invented just to give her a gimmick and doesn't actually impact her character or story that much. Like, her being the daughter of the Yatagarasu is obviously important, but the fact that she's a thief herself doesn't really matter a lot of the time, especially in the second game. It honestly feels like it's used for punchlines more than anything. Obviously, this isn't to say I dislike Kay, just that I have a bit more of a cynical view on her inception more than the other assistant characters. Anyway, what do I actually like about her? Well, her design is amazing and really striking. I think she rounds out the trio of her, Edgeworth, and Gumshoe really well. As for her story significance, I really like her appearance in Turnabout Reminiscence as a child. That was really cute and sad, and she's obviously the heart and soul of a Turnabout Forsaken. Her behavior without her memories is genuinely upsetting sometimes, but it's also really heartwarming seeing her react to Edgeworth doing everything he can to save her. I think this is the case where we see the most payoff on their bond. Anyway, I kind of expected Kay to do a bit better than she did, but the Investigations cast overall really underperformed based on my own expectations, like I said earlier. The only example of one of them doing well relative to their contemporaries was Simeon being among the most popular villains. This leads me into the character in the 18th place spot, who happens to be the most popular character from either Investigations game. Yeah, the highest ranked character from either of those two games, and they only barely made it into the top 20. Not to spoil too much, but at least one character from each of the other collections made it into the top 10, so it was really shocking to me to see the highest Investigations character this relatively low. These games were definitely always the ones that received the least amount of exposure over the years, so I guess that treatment hasn't fully worn off yet despite the release of the Investigations collection. Anyway, why don't we actually talk about this character now? In 18th place, with 261 votes, we have Eustace Winner. Yeah, even if his overall placement shocked me, I was not surprised to see him come out on top among the Investigations cast. He is far and above the fan favorite among these two games, and I am with the crowd that considers him to be the best to come out of this era of the series. One of my favorite archetypes in writing are characters who start out as comic relief side characters, but who end up going through a lot of growth and come out the other side as a really compelling figure in the story. And I think Eustace is one of the best examples of that I know of. For most of the game, he's treated like an absolute joke, being completely incompetent at his job, and basically needing Verity or Edgeworth to do everything for him. I think pairing his uselessness with his ego, he could have ended up as a really annoying character, but I think they did a good job of making him funny to the audience while annoying to the characters. But then in Case 4, we meet Excelsius, and Eustace gets a shock to the system that kickstarts the amazing arc he goes through in Case 5. One of my favorite scenes in the entire series is that final logic chess with him, as Edgeworth encourages him and tells him he can become a great prosecutor one day, despite what Excelsius has done and said to him. Oh, and then when Eustace finally returns to court with Edgeworth at his side, and he's finally able to stand up to his father, God, that whole sequence is genuinely the peak of the whole duology to me. One of the most striking pieces of imagery in the series is that one sprite of Eustace where he's still shedding tears, but he's also still standing with his head held high. Amazing stuff. I think Eustace is absolutely worthy of the title of Best Investigations character, and I really hope to see him again one day. Next, we move on to the character in 17th place, where we have the appearance of our first main protagonist on the poll. With 273 votes, we have the great ace attorney himself, Ryunosuke Naruhodo. Yeah, I can see how Ryunosuke can get a little lost in the shuffle among the absolutely star-studded cast of his games, but that obviously didn't stop a lot of people from voting for him. To me, I think he absolutely has one of the best arcs and character journeys in the entire series. I mean, he starts out as this nervous little Japanese university student who never wanted anything to do with law, but ends up using his legal prowess to uncover and take down a massive political conspiracy taking places in the highest levels of British government. Seeing how Ryunosuke progresses with each one of his cases is a joy to see, and is really the heart and soul of the duology. He does everything he can to defend his clients and uncover the truth, going to some pretty extreme lengths to do so. Like, he knowingly leaked highly confidential government secrets just to save Gina, and that honestly has to be one of the most badass things any Ace Attorney Pro Tag has ever done. All in all, despite starting out as one of the biggest underdogs in the series, Ryunosuke really ends up being one of the coolest lawyers to ever do it, which absolutely earned him a spot in the top 20, although I think he deserved to be a bit higher in my honest opinion. Now, it's honestly really fitting to see how close Ryunosuke ended up being to the character right above him in the ranking, with him being beaten out by a mere 5 votes. In 16th place, with 278 votes, we have Kazuma Asogi. While I knew Kazuma was popular, I didn't realize he would end up being this popular to where he was in the same league as Ryunosuke. But hey, even though he isn't who you're up against for most of the game, Kazuma really does slot into the whole confident and competent best friend / rival to the protagonist archetype to a T, which is why I imagine he stood out to so many people despite his relatively limited screen time. As for me, I really like how much impact Kazuma still ends up having on the plot despite his quote-unquote death, with carrying on his legacy being the primary motivation for both Ryunosuke and Susato. To be honest, I think they handled the mentor figure's death a lot better here than they did in Ace Attorney 1. I feel like it had a far greater impact on the protagonist, which is helped by the fact that Kazuma isn't coming back as a spirit. Well, at least until he literally comes back in the second game. Speaking of which, I really like how seeing him again in Game 2 gives you such a different perspective on him. Throughout the saga so far, Ryunosuke and Susato kind of put him on a pedestal, but here we get to see that deconstructed as we get a look at the vengeance and anger he was hiding deep down for the people that took his father away from him. It's really cool seeing Ryunosuke be on the receiving end of Kazuma's intensity as opposed to how it was all the way back in Case 1. And man, I feel like I was on the edge of my seat the entire time during the later sections of the final case, since I wanted so badly for Kazuma to not be the culprit, but I was genuinely so unsure if he was or not through so much of it. While Kazuma isn't really among my absolute favorites, even among the Great Ace Attorney cast, I could absolutely see why he is for so many others. Oh, and all of his musical themes are really good, especially Revival of the Prosecutor. Speaking of mentor characters, up next we have the OG Ace Attorney mentor. In 15th place, with 284 votes, we have Mia Fey. I did kind of expect Mia to at least break into the top 10, but she had some pretty hefty competition, and I guess she is the only major recurring character from the original trilogy to stay exclusive to those games. But regardless, I do think Mia was a really well done character throughout each one of the games she appears in. We don't really think about it now, but it's honestly pretty cool that an early 2000s male video game protagonist has a mentor who was a woman, and the relationship wasn't really presented as romantic in any way. It's nice that they're able to have a close platonic relationship like that. Anyway, Mia is great in the first game, but I think it's JFA where she really starts to become interesting to me. One moment that has always stood out to me in particular is when she develops psyche locks in Case 2, as she's trying to hide what she knows about Morgan's involvement in the murder. I like how she has trouble incriminating her aunt even though she knows she was guilty, and how it demystifies her in a way. In the first game, Mia was kind of this bastion of knowledge and guidance, the ideal that Phoenix was striving to live up to, but in JFA we start to see that she wasn't perfect, that she had the potential to let her personal feelings get in the way of the truth, which I think is the first sign that her always believe in your client philosophy isn't the end-all be-all that Phoenix initially treated it as. And then it's so cool that we actually get to play as Mia in a couple of her early cases in Trials and Tribulations. It also works towards demystifying her, but in a fun way. We see that she was just as nervous as Phoenix was when she was first starting out, and it's such a nice new perspective on her character we never got to see before, which also leads us to learning more about her past in general. Her relationship with Diego ends up being one of the most important story elements of the third game, and it's cool how this character, who has admittedly always been a bit on the sidelines, takes a bit of a center stage now. I really like how she admits to Phoenix that she won't be able to help him uncover the true killer in the final case and leaves him on his own. Not only does this raise the stakes, but it also calls back to that moment with Morgan a bit ago. Much like in that situation, she can't bring herself to help uncover the truth of what Diego did, which is that crucial flaw that ultimately allows Phoenix to surpass her as a lawyer. I like how Mia doesn't show up again after Ace Attorney 3, since to me it's an indication that both Phoenix and Maya have grown past needing to rely on her, and now that her past regrets with Diego have been resolved, she can finally pass on in peace. And even beyond the original trilogy, it's cool seeing Phoenix carry on her legacy and passing on her teachings to Apollo and Athena, even if Mia herself doesn't get mentioned very often. Alright, we took a quick break from the Great Ace Attorney, but let's jump right back in with who is not only our first character to receive over 300 votes, but also being the second most popular character from the Great Ace Attorney saga. In 14th place, with 314 votes, we have Susato Mikotoba. Man, Susato is such a cool take on the female assistant archetype, with her actually being incredibly knowledgeable in law, and basically being Ryunosuke's legal mentor throughout most of the story. While every assistant character is obviously helpful in their own ways, Susato stands out as probably being the most capable out of all of them in the courtroom, and I really like how misogyny and the prejudice she faces as a young woman plays a big part in her story. To be honest, if it were actually legal for her to practice in court,
she probably would have ended up being the main character instead of Ryunosuke. Speaking of which, it was so cool getting to actually play as her in the first case of the second game, and I was honestly really disappointed we never got to do so again. Capcom better make a new Great Ace Attorney game with her as the protagonist, or they're a bunch of cowards. Anyway, I liked how she made some misogynistic comments while she was playing the role of Ryutaro, but everyone in the courtroom ends up calling her out for being closed-minded and bigoted. I thought that was really funny. Anyway, yeah, Susato is just a really cool and unique character for the series. I would love to see her again one day, especially if we get to play as her some more. Really glad she ended up making it so high in the poll. Up next, we finally get to talk about another rival prosecutor from the main series. Yeah, once again, it is low-key really embarrassing seeing how bad Nayuta did compared to everyone else. Anyway, in 13th place, with 386 votes, it's Clavier Gavin. Or is it Clavier? I've heard a couple different pronunciations. Anyway, Clavier is just really cool. A prosecutor who's also a famous rock star is such an awesome idea, and it results in one of the most fun opponents to take on in court. I know it makes him seem a little boring to some people, but I really like how he's genuinely such a chill guy and isn't nearly as antagonistic towards the protagonist as pretty much every other rival in the series. Like, I obviously love the ones from the original trilogy, but I feel like doing the whole jerk prosecutor who eventually learns the error of their ways thing for a fourth time would have gotten a little repetitive, so I'm glad they took a different approach this time around. But man, I feel like Clavier has to be one of the Ace Attorney characters who has done the absolute dirtiest by the writers. Like, he just doesn't really do anything at all after Apollo Justice, just making a minor cameo in one of the cases in Dual Destinies, and then never again. Imagine if Edgeworth's only appearance after the first game was showing up for 5 minutes in Turnabout Big Top. That's basically what they did to Clavier, and I don't think I will ever not be mad about that. I'm really glad that the Ace Attorney fandom still clearly cares about him a lot, even if the developers obviously didn't back then. But as I was saying, Clavier is so fun to see in action. All his little rockstar mannerisms are great, and his sick air guitar is always cool when he pulls it out. And I also think it's great how he has that laid-back attitude when prosecuting, but then his whole demeanor flips when it comes to his music. It's fun seeing him go into full diva mode when stuff starts going wrong during his show and Turnabout Serenade, and I think it adds a lot to his character in my opinion. Anyway, yeah, Clavier's great, and they better make him important in the next game or I swear to God, someone is getting hurt. After Clavier, up next in 12th place, we fittingly have the prosecutor that directly followed him up, as well as our first character who received over 400 votes. With 411 votes, it's Simon Blackwell. I would have quite a bit to say about Simon myself, but instead, I think it's about time to invite our final special guest to come in and talk about him.
Surprise everyone, it's me, Schaffrillas. I was graciously invited here to talk about one of the characters I voted for, and I briefly considered talking about Aristotle Means, because he's the character I have a lot of ironic enjoyment for. But I figured I should probably take this seriously, and also I don't even think I actually voted for Means. But I did vote for one of my personal favorite characters in the series, Simon Blackwell. He's not my number one favorite prosecutor, only because my number one favorite is the boring answer everyone else picks, but he's my favorite non-obvious choice. His design is so cool, and I love the whole twisted samurai motif. It's just awesome to have a prisoner prosecutor who turns out to be such a noble and selfless guardian angel looking out for Athena. Their dynamic is so strong and really elevates the thankless, overhated case that is Turnabout Storyteller. Not to mention, his character and presence in court really elevates Dual Destinies as a whole. It's one of the best instances of the prosecutor and the main plot of the game cleverly revolving around each other, and doing battle in court over his fate is a large reason why Dual Destinies has one of the best final cases in the series. He's also got a great personality that straddles the line between intimidating and goofy. I love his silence voice line, as well as his funny love-hate relationship with Bobby Fulbright. They make for such an odd but endearing pairing, and watching Taka get sent out and land on the judge's head is always a delight. I really love everything about Simon, and I think this is a more than respectable placement for him. I figured he wouldn't rank top 10 in the whole series, but 12th is higher than I expected, honestly. I'm glad there are tons of other fans of him out there.
Now, it's time for our final character before the top 10, who just barely missed making it into the prestigious Hall of Fame, and who also happens to be the most popular character from Dual Destinies, beating out Simon by a pretty large margin. In 11th place, with exactly 500 votes, we have Athena Sykes. Yeah, I personally thought Athena was a shoo-in for the top 10, but she was up against some very fierce competition and was unfortunately passed up in the end. Still, 11th place is obviously a very high pedestal to stand on, even if I wish she ended up just a little bit higher. Anyway, Athena's a great character and a wonderful inclusion for the series. It's great having a female character to go with Phoenix and Apollo in the main playable cast of the two 3DS titles, even if she did end up with the short end of the stick in that field, with only 2 cases where she's fully playable for now. I mean, Turnabout Academy is definitely my favorite case from Dual Destinies, and getting to play as Athena is a pretty big part of that. Regardless, even as just a companion, she's a joy to have around, with her dynamic with Apollo being one of my favorites in the whole series. I love how expressive she is, with the devs really taking advantage of what they could do with the new 3D models, and I think having Widget around to further accentuate those expressions adds a lot. Speaking of which, the mood matrix has to be my favorite out of all of the gimmick mechanics. I think it's really fun picking out inconsistencies in the witness's emotions, and I like how it adds a bit of psychological analysis to the series. I would love to see this return and expanded upon in a future game. As for her story, I really liked what they did with her backstory in Dual Destinies. Her story is genuinely really tragic, and it's nice seeing her so upbeat in the present day despite that. But man, they go to some really dark places with her in Case 5. The idea of child Athena killing her mother but trying to use the robot repair machine to fix her is genuinely some of the most horrific imagery the series has ever pulled, even if it didn't end up happening. Unfortunately, she did end up getting pretty sidelined in Spirit of Justice, but I think she's still great in the limited role she has in that game, and even if Turnabout's storyteller is pure filler, like I said earlier, I think it's a really fun case despite that. My absolute biggest wish for the future of the series is for Athena to get her own game. I think she really deserves it, and I think all 500 people who voted for her would agree with me on this.
Alright everybody, it's been a long journey, but we finally made it to the top 10.
Each of these 10 series icons have fought tooth and nail for a seat in this most prestigious lineup, with some of them coming surprisingly close to one another. However, I definitely think all of them earned their spots as the most popular characters in the franchise. Now, let's get into it, shall we? Starting off with our 10th most popular character, we have Emma Skye, who received 543 votes. I didn't mention it before, but once again, we could have had a really satisfying cutoff with the top 10 being everyone who got over 500 votes, but what can you do? Anyway, it was really cool seeing Emma's progression throughout the series. Like, she was just kind of created out of necessity at the start, right? They were making a new case set in between games 1 and 2, but Maya was gone during that time and Phoenix needed a companion character, so they created Emma to fill that role. And that isn't to say Emma was a bad character in Rise from the Ashes, not at all. I've seen people criticize her for just being a Maya clone, but I definitely think she has her own unique charm that sets her apart from Maya. I like her special interest in forensic science, how that leads to her taking a very analytical approach to the world around her, which is contrasted by her being a bit naive and maybe not as street smart as Maya was. Anyway, the real cool part of all this was what was done with her after the first game. She easily could have just ended up being exclusive to this weird little add-on to the original trilogy, but I think the devs really ended up liking her, seeing as she really shot up in prominence in the DS era. It was such an amazing idea to not only bring her back as an adult in Apollo Justice, but to evolve her character like they did. After all this time, she actually ended up being really jaded and grumpy because, well, she didn't end up getting her dream job, and she's stuck working a career she doesn't even like that much. It's sad, but I honestly applaud Capcom for going with this more realistic direction for her character. While people like AA1 Emma, I think her adult version is the main reason most people voted for her, and I definitely have to agree. Apollo Justice Emma in particular is definitely my favorite depiction of her, with her relationship with Clavier being a pretty big highlight. In stark contrast to Gumshoe and Edgeworth's relationship, Emma clearly does not care for this guy, and it's funny seeing her take every chance he can to dunk on him. But the nice thing is, that upbeat teenage Emma isn't completely gone either, as she brightens right up when forensics get involved, which is really nice to see. Oddly enough, I think that whole dynamic makes her one of the most relatable Ace Attorney characters for me. And, even if cynical Emma is my favorite version of her, it is still really nice to see her finally achieve her dream in Spirit of Justice. I'm glad they thought to bring her back for that game after she got left out in Dual Destinies. Oh, and I guess she definitely does appear in the Investigations games. Yep, she is certainly in them. Her pretty nothing roles in those games is so weird to me, since In case you didn't know, the original idea for Investigations was for it to have Emma as the protagonist, which would have been really cool. At least she got that VR thing. Anyway, overall, Emma has got to be one of my favorite characters in the whole series, just for how dynamic she is, and I think she clearly earned a spot in the top 10. If I voted, she definitely would have been another of my 5 picks. Now, as we've gotten higher and higher on the list, you've probably noticed how big the gaps in votes between placements have been. However, something really weird that happened here is that numbers 10 through 8 on this list only have a difference of a single vote, which is a really crazy coincidence. These placements had a really tight running, apparently. Anyway, moving on to the 9th place in the poll, we have a character I was really happy to see do as well as she did. With 544 votes, we have Trucy Wright. Yeah, while I expected to see Trucy do pretty well, I honestly didn't expect her to reach the top 10. I mean, she's obviously a great character, but I always feel like she kinda got a little forgotten among the other female assistant characters, since she really only gets to really play that role in one game. I definitely expected her to get beaten out by Athena at the very least, but I'm very happy to be proven wrong, and see just how many people appreciate her like this. Man, I imagine it would have been a real shock to the system for people going into AA4 blind, for Phoenix to suddenly have a teenage daughter running around, and then have her be your main companion throughout the game. She's just a really cool addition that adds a lot to Phoenix's story, while also being a great character in her own right. Anyway, I'll just say right off the bat, Trucy got done absolutely dirty by the 3DS games. Like, they included her at least, but only barely. Her role throughout Dual Destinies is really just to stand around at home for the entire game, and then get kidnapped in the final case, which doesn't even seem to impact things that much. Spirit of Justice treats her slightly better, with her having a case that gives her some focus, but after that it's back to being a background character again. And all of this makes me so upset because of how great she is in Apollo Justice. She and Apollo have a wonderful dynamic, with Apollo typically being the straight man to her magical antics. But there's always that sneaking feeling that something's a little off about her. There are these moments, especially in court, where she really locks in and starts guiding Apollo when he really needs it. Makes it seem like there's a lot more going on with her than the bubbly persona she puts on up front. Something that really stuck out to me with this was how she just casually drops that she figured out that Shady Smith was her father during the final case. Like, you really don't need to talk about that? Stop bottling things up, girl. You don't want to end up like your dad. Speaking of her family, I do really like the twist that she and Apollo are siblings. It just feels so right for them. I just wish they would actually get to know about that. And I know I ragged on the 3DS games for not really including her, and I still stand by that. I swear those writers would have just left her out entirely if they could. But I think what crumbs we do get of her were really good. I especially like the segment in the final case where she and Phoenix get to investigate together. It makes me really want a case where we get them as the main duo. Anyway, once again, it's so great to see Trucy do well on this poll. She beat out some really big names, and I can't help but feel really proud of her, you know? Up next, with only a single vote higher than Trucy, we have our character in 8th place, who also happens to hold the title of the most popular Great Ace Attorney character, and the only one to make it into the top 10. With 545 votes, we have the great detective himself, Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, even though his fight for the 8th place spot overall was narrow, he ended up being the most popular DGS character by a very large margin. Like, he got over 200 more votes than Susato did in 2nd place, so those Great Ace Attorney fans obviously really like him. To be honest, I think Shelms may win the award for the funniest Ace Attorney characters in the whole series, in my opinion. Like, the amount of utterly ridiculous shenanigans he gets himself into are way too many to count, and the entire dance of deduction mechanic is centered around correcting the unhinged crap that comes out of his mouth when investigating. And I think this humor adds a lot to his character, since throughout the game, you can never really figure out if he actually is just a joke with good PR, or if he actually is a genius that's just having fun, knowing full well that what he's saying is wrong and is just using it to test you. I think his name in the English version adds to this, since the name Sherlock Holmes kind of paints a picture of a weird knockoff version of Sherlock Holmes, even though his name is just Sherlock in the original Japanese. Is this guy actually as smart as his namesake, or is he just a parody? This whole situation is made even funnier by the fact that they could have used the actual names for Holmes and Watson if they just waited a few years to release the English version, since they entered public domain like 2 years later. But hey, I don't even know if I want to trade out the name Sherlock Holmes, since like I said, it kind of adds to the character in a way. Anyway, it is really cool to see him finally lock in during the game's finale, and witness how competent he can really be. That final dance of deduction with Mikotoba is great, And I don't care what anyone else says, I love the moment where he pulls up as a hologram at the very end and gets Queen Victoria to fire a strong hard sorry ass. That dance is iconic, and I wouldn't trade it for anything else. As for his status as the most popular Great Ace Attorney character, I personally wouldn't put him as high as he ended up being, but I can understand why so many people like him as much as they do. If these games were a little more mainstream, I could absolutely see him being Tumblr sexy man material. Now, up in 7th place, we have who ended up being by far the most popular character to only appear in a single game. With 564 votes, we have Diego Armando, also known as Godot. Man, I don't know about you guys, but back in the early to mid 2010s when I first got into the series, it really felt like Godot was the fan favorite character in the series, along with Trials and Tribulations being the fan favorite game. I think as time has gone on and appreciation has grown for the other corners of the franchise, Godot has been left a little to the wayside a bit in terms of popularity. I don't see him talk about nearly as much as I used to, but that clearly hasn't stopped a lot of people from absolutely loving this guy, and for good reason too. I think just in terms of pure charm and charisma, I think Godot may be number 1 out of any of the prosecutors you go up against in the series. I love all the weird esoteric metaphors he throws out in court. He always has this chill vibe to him no matter what, and there's obviously the way he's constantly downing a nice warm cup of coffee. Like, you would think the coffee obsession would make him feel a little silly, but I think he makes it work really well. And of course, how can I not talk about his theme music, which absolutely has to be one of the best in the franchise. I mean, it is the only song to get a vote in this poll after all. I love how he feels relaxed and laid back initially, but develops this hint of deep sadness once you know the full context of Godot's character. Speaking of which, beyond the surface level, Godot is such a deeply tragic and compelling character. It's so sad learning about what happened to him, and it's really upsetting to see the dark, vengeful path he ended up going down. Despite his sympathetic past, he's so driven by ego and a desire for vengeance that it leads him to making choices that endanger the people he cares about. Like he said himself, if Diego had just talked to Phoenix first before hatching his plan to stop Dahlia, Misty wouldn't have had to die, and Maya and Pearl wouldn't have had their own brushes with death, but his pride didn't allow him to take help from someone he looked down upon. And man, the finale of Bridge to the Turnabout is absolutely legendary, and Godot has so much to do with that. Whenever I think of iconic quotes in the series, in my world, the color red doesn't exist. These must be my tears. Always comes to mind. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, but that moment in Beginnings where he smashes his coffee cup and just leans against the bench with a bleeding hand is raw as all hell. Overall, it's really cool seeing how much of an impact Godot made on people despite having a relatively small amount of screen time. I think he definitely earned his spot as the fan favorite back in the day, and it's nice to see that he still holds a place in a lot of people's hearts, even now. So, fun fact. Godot was actually in 5th place for the longest time, which made sense to me considering he's a pretty universally popular character. However, as the counting process went on, the 2 characters behind him gradually made their way up, and eventually overtook him, sending him down to 7th, and these characters are ones I'm very attached to, and ones I never would have expected to be able to beat out Godot, so it was really cool seeing it happen in real time. I'm very proud of them and this community for giving them the appreciation they deserve. Anyway, let's actually talk about them, starting with our character in 6th place. With 576 votes, we have the 3rd most popular main protagonist in the series, and the most popular character from the sequel trilogy. It's none other than Apollo Justice himself. Yeah, so if you weren't aware, Apollo's titular title was kind of the black sheep of the Ace Attorney series for a long time. People really did not like this game when it came out, for a number of reasons I won't get into, and I think for a while this reputation kind of extended to Apollo himself somewhat. I don't think anyone viciously disliked him or anything, but there was always this sentiment that he was just kind of uninteresting, just a lesser version of Phoenix, and when Dual Destinies came around, he kind of got left to the wayside in favor of Athena and Phoenix, which also kind of happened in his own game. It wasn't really until the very end with Spirit of Justice where he got to be the main focus of a game's finale. Anyway, unlike all those other fans back then, I've always been cool and based. Maybe I just enjoyed being a contrarian, but I really liked both Apollo and his game back when I first played it. Hell, he was the first Ace Attorney character I ever decided was my favorite, and he's still in my top 10 to this day. Because of this, Apollo's always felt like an underdog to me, even compared to the other attorneys in the series where being the underdog is kind of part of the premise. But man, it has been so cool to see appreciation for Apollo steadily grow as the years have gone by. Maybe Ace Attorney 4 was just more popular in the spaces I didn't frequent back in the day, but it feels like that game has developed a very dedicated and passionate fanbase that also extends to Apollo himself. Now, why don't we actually talk about his character?
While Apollo definitely has a lot of similarities to Phoenix, he also has a lot of differences that make him stand out as new blood. I love how much more passionate and aggressive he feels in court, tending to wear his emotions on his sleeve compared to how secretive Phoenix was, fitting the bright red suit versus Phoenix's cool blue. He just feels very youthful and excitable, bringing a lot of energy to the protagonist role. But he also feels more nervous, like he's stressed about living up to Phoenix's legacy, which he kinda had to do in the first game to the fans. I also like how he's kinda the ultimate straight man of the Write Anything agency, often being on the receiving end of the shenanigans that Phoenix, Athena, and especially Trucy get up to. He feels the most normal out of all of them without feeling boring, which makes him really endearing. And man, it is pretty ironic that the most normal character here also has this incredibly wild past, being the secret son of a famous magician and singer, being adopted by former foreign royalty, and being best friends with an astronaut who got assassinated by an international spy. I know people tend to rag on this aspect of his character, saying that he has 3 different backstories and whatnot, and I don't totally disagree, but only in that I wish these parts of his story were allowed to be acknowledged outside of the games they were introduced in. Like, the fact that Clay wasn't mentioned a single time in SOJ kinda makes it feel like he wasn't actually an important part of Apollo's life. I think it's fine to have a character with a multifaceted past, you just gotta actually commit to it, you know? Anyway, I feel really proud that Apollo was able to make it up this high, even if he barely missed the top 5. Seeing him go from this character that people didn't really care for that much, to being someone who was able to beat out Godot in popularity, has been very nice to see, and almost reflects his story in the games, going from this extreme underdog thrown into the chaos of court, to someone who was able to overthrow an entire foreign monarchy with nothing but legal prowess. Now, while I was greatly pleased by Apollo's performance, I think this next entry starting off our top 5 may be the most pleased any of these placements has made me, being another character who really wasn't talked about or even mainly flat out disliked back in the day, but has risen to be a true icon of the series in the modern era of this community. In 5th place, with 581 votes, we have the character who is tied for being my #1 personal favorite in the whole series. It's Franziska von Karma. A lot like Apollo, maybe I just wasn't looking in the right spaces back in the day, but I really felt like not many people cared for Franziska back then, with her definitely being the least liked out of the rival prosecutors before Nayuta came along. I feel bad for saying this, but unlike Apollo, I was kind of in the same camp for the longest time, but man, the recent resurgence that Ace Attorney has had in the past couple years has done a lot for Franziska, and especially for me considering, like I said, she's one of my absolute favorites now. Kind of a weird observation, but I noticed that she's extremely popular among lesbians. Like, if you're a lesbian Ace Attorney fan, I'd say there's a very high chance that Franziska is somewhere on your top 10.
I think the main thing that held her back in general appreciation is the fact that, unlike nearly all the other prosecutors, her story isn't a major focus of the final case of her game. Besides maybe Clavier, all the others are a very central figure in their game's finale, but that just isn't the case with Franziska in Farewell My Turnabout.
This isn't to say she isn't important to that case, it's just that she's put on the back burner in favor of Phoenix and Edgeworth stories there, which I think is very unfortunate because I think Franziska's story in Justice for All is one of the most compelling to me in the entire series. I really like that she's first presented as not much more than Manfred Jr. She's obsessed with perfection like her dad, she shares a lot of his mannerisms and methods, so obviously she must still be loyal to him and fight Phoenix for revenge. But if you actually slow down and pay attention, Franziska is actually very different from her father in some very key ways. For one, their ideas of a perfect case couldn't be less alike. Manfred was all about getting things done as quickly as possible, but Franziska is instead focused on being as thorough as possible. She allows the court to explore every possibility presented by the defense, which is honestly very respectable of her, even if her goal with it is to shut it down. This comes to a head in Big Top, where you finally learn about her connections to Edgeworth and what her true motivations are. I think that whole scene is really cool for how it blindsides Phoenix and any unspoiled players. Her relationship with Edgeworth, which gets explored further in AA3 in the Investigations games, is one of my favorite dynamics in this series. Even though they bicker constantly and are always trying to one-up each other, it's clear that they care about each other deeply, added on to the pile of amazing sibling duos in Ace Attorney. I know some people are bothered by her overall very aggressive and prideful attitude, with her whipping people all the time and all that, but I think it ends up being a cool element of her characterization that is unfortunately never directly focused on. It's a bit easy to forget, but Franziska is still a teenage girl in a field dominated by adult men, so I imagine behaving the way that she does was her way of garnering the respect and authority she ought to have considering her skills in court. And man, that very last scene at the airport at the end of JFA. To be honest, I think that scene might be my favorite moment in the entire series, full stop.
I love how this is the single time that Franziska lets her guard down and allows anyone to see her emotional side. To be honest, I'm having a hard time containing everything I want to say about Franziska, since I do need to move on eventually, so I'm going to leave things here. In the end, I'm extremely happy to see Franziska experience this big surge in popularity, and I'm very grateful that her fans converted me into a massive enjoyer of her character. Like I said, she's tied for being my absolute favorite in the series, but we still have one more character that shares that spot with her, who we'll get to shortly. Up next, we have another huge vote difference between the 5th and 4th place characters, with this next character receiving over 100 more votes than Franziska. Now, while I've had my share of surprises with the top 10 so far, I think these top 4 were the ones I always figured were going to be up here, so seeing them place where they didn't surprise me much at all. In 4th place, we have the character who just barely missed the top podium. With 701 votes, it's Detective Dick Gumshoe. Man, Gumshoe really is one of the most lovable characters out there, isn't he? It makes complete sense to me that he made it up this high, even if he doesn't have the biggest impact on the ongoing mysteries and narratives in the series. Even if he isn't a huge player, that unrelenting likability and charm of his is easy enough for him to worm his way into many people's hearts. If you don't like Gumshoe, I genuinely think you're either a miserable person or lying. I think his key standout feature is just how loyal he is. After Edgeworth defended him at his lowest, he's been by that man's side ever since. Even after he was arrested for murder, Gumshoe did everything he could to save Edgeworth, and when Phoenix and Maya took up his defense in court, Gumshoe has always stood with them too. In particular, I think about how Gumshoe put his career and his own life on the line to save Maya in Farewell My Turnabout. Like, thinking about everything he did to get Phoenix those last pieces of evidence makes me more emotional than most things in the series. He's just always a delight to have around, and he always tries his best to do what's right, even if he isn't the most capable a lot of the time. And hell, even if he admittedly isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, he's surprisingly very emotionally intelligent. Even though Franziska put him through hell in JFA, and he had every right to hate her, he's still worried about her in the final case, being the one to remind everyone at the end of the day, Franziska is still a teenager with a lot on her shoulders, definitely one of his most likable moments among many. He's honestly a really inspiring character, oddly enough. Like, even though he's the most down-on-his-luck guy around, it doesn't stop him from trying his best and having a good attitude. And to top it all off, he's just really funny. He has so many great moments across the games, like when he sings that tune during Bridge, or when he gets excited about Chief Gant giving him $50, or that oddly really insightful and beautiful line in Rise from the Ashes he gives about art being a battle against oppression. He's obviously gotten a lot of exposure over the years, but it's really a huge shame we never got to see him, or even hear at all about how he's doing after the time skip. I really wonder what the big guy's up to. Alright, we've made it, guys. We're here at the top 3, ready to hand out the bronze, silver, and that highly coveted gold medal. And I don't think I could think of more fitting characters to receive these awards. These guys really are the big 3 of Ace Attorney, being by far the most prevalent and iconic characters of the franchise, indicated by another big jump up in the vote totals. The character in 3rd place ended up with nearly 250 more votes than Gumshoe got. Speaking of which, we've also reached the other character who's tied with Franziska for being my all-time favorite, and who I was personally rooting for to win. But alas, the 2 characters above them were simply too heavy of hitters. But hey, 3rd place out of hundreds is nothing to be unhappy with. With 946 votes, the scientifically proven 3rd most popular Ace Attorney character is Maya Fey. I'll just start by saying that I honestly believe that Maya and her relationship with Phoenix is pretty much the heart and soul of the original trilogy. I feel like their bond and dynamic with each other is what makes most of these games as enjoyable as they are. Maya is just this wonderful, fun presence that complements Phoenix's role as the cynical, in-over-his-head straight man, and they do a great job of grounding one another. She has this bright-eyed way of interacting with the world that's both endearing and funny. She isn't naive, but she feels like she perceives things in the most fun-loving and silly way possible, and I think this is complemented greatly by the intense struggle she goes throughout the trilogy. Like, a lot of incredibly messed up stuff happens to her, but she still tries to keep up a positive face and attitude for the sake of people around her, especially Pearl. I really enjoyed her arc throughout the trilogy, where she has to grapple with becoming the channeling master one day, which isn't something she really necessarily even wants, but knows it's something she has a responsibility to do. It's really tragic seeing her on the stand at the end of Bridge, where she's at her absolute lowest emotionally and swears off channeling altogether. Considering everything that path has put her through, I honestly don't blame her for that at all. But in the end, it's nice to see that even after everything, she has her friends and family to support her as she ultimately decides to commit to the title of Master. You can tell how much she's matured over the course of the story while she still feels like her old Maya self. And hey, we get to see that payoff when she finally returns in Spirit of Justice. Kind of. I do like what we actually get to see of Maya in that game, but that ended up not being a whole lot. She's a defendant again in Case 3, where she's reintroduced, so we only get to see her in detention and in court, and then she's MIA for most of Case 5, and that's it for the base game. Sure, she gets to be your companion for the DLC case, but that honestly felt a bit too little too late for me back then, especially since Maya's return was a big part of SOJ's marketing. I was also pretty disappointed by how little she gets to interact with the newer cast. Like, it's a crime we don't get to see her hang out with Trucy. Still, it's nice that she's there at all. I'm not going to be ungrateful for that. Anyway, like I said, Maya really is the heart of the original trilogy, and it kind of baffles me that there are people who don't like her. And unlike Gumshoe, I have encountered people who, actually really dislike Maya, and at that point, I kind of have to question how you even enjoyed these games at all, considering how vital and prominent her presence is to all 3 of the original games. But hey, those guys are clearly a very small minority considering just how many people voted for her, giving her a much-deserved spot on the podium, even if I think she deserved even more than just the bronze medal. Now, as we move on to the top 2 most popular characters in the series, we hit a very significant milestone in the vote totals. These 2 characters at the top were the only 2 to reach over 1,000 votes. To put that into perspective, we had around 3,000 people send in votes, meaning over a third of voters voted for one or both of these top 2. Really goes to show just how popular these 2 are, and it makes sense considering I would consider them to truly be the biggest icons of the series. Even if you're only casually aware of the series, I think you'd be able to recognize one and probably both of these guys. Anyway, with that preamble out of the way, why don't we talk about our runner-up for the most popular Ace Attorney character? In second place, with 1,024 votes, it's the man himself, the turnabout terror, Phoenix Wright. If you've seen the videos that this poll was inspired by, you would know that the main protagonists tend not to do as well as their prominence would suggest. But that was absolutely not the case for this series. Talking about Phoenix here was pretty challenging, considering just how much he appears and the sheer variety of his depictions. We've seen him at so many different stages of his life, but I think that's what makes him so likable to so many people. There's a Phoenix for every occasion and for everyone, from people who like the nervous rookie, to the beaten down and grizzled man at his lowest, or as the veteran lawyer who's back in his prime and ready to mentor a new generation. There's a lot to love, and I think that shows how he was by far the character who had the most people specifying specific incarnations in their votes. In the original trilogy, I think Phoenix is kind of the perfect everyman protagonist, while still having a distinct and strong arc, and having an intriguing past we're only let in on at select moments. I've seen some people say that Trilogy Phoenix is boring, or that he isn't the real main character of his games, but I honestly couldn't disagree more with that sentiment. Sure, he isn't the focus of the ongoing mysteries going on, but his actions and decisions are very meaningful, and are still what drive the plot forward. His ideals as a lawyer and how those evolve are kind of what these games are all about. I don't think any of these games would be the same if you swapped out Phoenix for someone else. Speaking of which, I love how each game in the trilogy shows us how Phoenix's mindset towards lawyering changes. In the first game, he sticks by what Mia taught him about believing in your client no matter what, but Justice for All challenges that unflinching belief and has him learn what's most important above all else: finding the truth, even if it means losing your case. And then, in Trials and Tribulations, we see Phoenix putting that new philosophy to effect and surpassing Mia as a lawyer in the end. And I think we often forget, but he's genuinely really funny too. So many of the gags in these games work because they have Phoenix to bounce off of with the witty comebacks that may or may not stay in his head. Even if he isn't a personal favorite of mine, I cannot deny that Phoenix has to be one of the best written characters in the series. However, I think my favorite version of Phoenix has to be the one we see in Apollo Justice. He's definitely a very controversial element of that game, maybe the most controversial, and I can understand why. Especially before Dual Destinies was announced, I think it must have hurt a lot of fans to learn that Phoenix lost his badge shortly after the end of Game 3, which wasn't helped by how different he seemed in this new game, with some accusing him of being wildly out of character, or even claiming it as character assassination. However, once again, I really couldn't disagree more. I think this take on the character is really compelling to me, and I think it fits his character considering everything he went through. Phoenix has always been secretive and kept his emotions bottled up, and not only are we not in his POV anymore, but I imagine that aspect of himself was exaggerated even more after 7 years of disbarment. And on a less serious side, I think this version of Phoenix is also really funny. I like how much he and Trucy mess with Apollo, and he kind of has that Mr. Miyagi vibe of mentoring him in very cryptic ways. I think the only real issue with Ace Attorney 4 Phoenix that I have is that I don't think they did a good enough job of making his disbarment feel as believable as it could have had. I think they definitely should have gone into more detail about how it happened, considering how extreme and impactful of a plot point it was. But that doesn't really bother me that much, considering how much I like the Phoenix that the disbarment resulted in, and it seemed not for a lot of people considering how many voted for specifically this incarnation. While I believe people generally prefer his bright, lawyerly self, Phoenix has a lot of very dedicated fans. Moving on, I think the Phoenix I have the least positive opinion on is the version we see in the 3DS games. I think he could have been great as an experienced mentor figure for Apollo and Athena. I think the moments where he actually gets to do that are good, but a lot of it's kind of squandered by the fact that he's the guy you're playing as for most of these games. Unlike the original trilogy, I really don't think Phoenix needed to be the main character here, and he definitely should have taken a back seat to let his subordinate shine. I don't dislike him here, but he really isn't nearly as compelling or interesting enough as he was in the previous games. It really feels like they just have him here for marketing purposes. I think that Ace Attorney 4's poor reception and Investigation's poor sales really scared them out of trying new things with new protagonists, which is a shame. However, the fact that they've marketed the sequel trilogy as Apollo's games makes me hopeful they've gotten over that. Regardless, while Phoenix kind of has that Mario effect of fading into the back of my mind due to how much exposure he gets, I cannot deny just how effective Phoenix has been as the mascot of this franchise, with the majority of his appearances living up to that status in my opinion. I hope that the next Ace Attorney game lets him put down the mantle as the main protagonist. That doesn't mean I wouldn't still love to see him in action again. And here we are, finally rising up above nearly 400 others. It's time to reveal who the #1 most popular Ace Attorney character is. And to put into perspective just how popular they are, I want to highlight the jump in votes between the #1 and #2 spot. We've had some pretty big jumps before, but the character in first place received over 300 more votes than Phoenix did. That means nearly half of all the people who voted on this poll included this character among the 5 they selected. But, without further ado, it'll be my honor to finally reveal them to you. In first place, with 1,335 votes, the most popular Ace Attorney character is Prosecutor Miles Edgeworth. Yeah, very early on into the vote tallying process, it was extremely clear that Edgeworth was going to come out on top, and I honestly feel a little silly for not expecting this from the very beginning. I mean, he's the only character to be so popular, he ended up getting his own full-length game and a sequel to go with it. He's also the only character to play some kind of major role in all 3 of the sets of games. Well, except for Larry too, oddly enough. So even if he doesn't have nearly the same amount of total screen time as Phoenix does, he's still by far one of the most prominent and recurring characters in the series. Like Phoenix, you get a lot of time to get attached to him, and unlike Phoenix, I don't think there's really any depictions of him that a lot of people dislike. Everyone seems to love Edgeworth, regardless of where he shows up, and for good reason too, seeing as he has a genuinely really compelling story that spans nearly the entire history of the series. While I said Phoenix is one of the best arcs, not only does Edgeworth have one too, this is probably the most apparent and satisfying to see. It's really cool seeing him start out as this smug jerk, willing to go with any underhanded tactics that may help him win, but then have his morals shaken by Phoenix and change for the better. And then we get to see that followed up on in the second game, where he's matured a lot and wants to help Phoenix realize the same things he did. He and Phoenix just have one of the most compelling and complex relationships in the series, and I think that also adds to just how popular both of them are, considering there's a certain crowd of people who really like their relationship. Like, even if you're not much of a shipper, you can't deny that there's a little something there, right? Anyway, moving on to the Investigations games, I think Edgeworth is a really fun character to get to play as. Getting to do that as a surprise in Trials and Tribulations was already amazing, so getting 2 entire games of that is a real treat. Even if I'm not the biggest fan of the first Investigations game, I think the player character is definitely one of its highlights. Special shout out to the logic and mind chess mechanics from his games. I think both of those are some really fun stuff to play with. And then there's the sequel, which is not only one of the best Ace Attorney games in general, but also where Edgeworth is at his best in my opinion. His arc in that game is so good, and is a great progression of his story in the original trilogy, where he grapples with whether or not he still wants to be a prosecutor, or to follow his father's footsteps as a defense attorney. If I had played that game before knowing about his appearance in the 3DS games, I think that's an internal debate that would have genuinely kept me on my toes, not being sure which path he would ultimately pick. I envy any of the Japanese fans who got to experience that back then, or any new fans playing through the series blind in release order. Speaking of those 3DS games, I do really enjoy his presence there, even if he isn't the most prominent. Like, I genuinely forget he shows up in Turnabout Revolution most of the time, but it's just nice seeing him happy and content after going through so much strife earlier in the series. And I think it's really cool that his new design subtly calls back to Gregory with the glasses and longer coat. Even outside of his writing, Edgeworth is just a very entertaining character all around. He has a lot of really cool moments across all of the games, like when he speaks up against Vasquez in Samurai, or his pep talk with Franziska at the end of Justice for All, but he also has a lot of really funny moments too, like how he can never get any of his witnesses to state their name and occupation. I think the fact that he tries to keep up this air of elegance and composure, but constantly has to deal with the wackiest crap despite it, is peak comedy to me. But the demeanor makes him all the more badass when he's taking down an opponent in court or on the crime scene. I feel a little bad since I don't have as much to say about Edgeworth as I did Phoenix, but I feel what makes Miles so great is also so self-explanatory. I don't think I've come across a single person who genuinely dislikes him, which I think is truly a testament to just how much they absolutely cooked with this one character. And hey, even if he wasn't in my top 5, Edgeworth is still absolutely one of my all-time favorites. He's definitely top 10 material to be sure. All in all, even if he wasn't who I was rooting for to win, I think he absolutely deserves the title of the #1 most popular Ace Attorney character. Hey everyone, it's the Charavatar from the future here, or future relative to the one you've been listening to for the past 3 hours or so. I just wanted to pop in and give some closing thoughts here at the end. So, first and foremost, I want to give a huge thanks to everyone who helped or contributed in any way to this project, particularly all the special guests who decided to give their thoughts and add some extra life to the video. It means a lot to me that I've been able to make these kinds of connections in the Ace Attorney community and to have them on here like this. Oh, and it was honestly such an honor to have Schaffrillas Productions himself be a part of the video. He has been such a huge creative inspiration ever since I started watching his stuff, and the idea of having him contribute to something I made is honestly such a dream come true. Speaking of which, the idea for this project first came about back when his original Mario Poll video came out. It's such a fun video format, and I think ever since I was introduced to the concept, I had dreamed of doing one myself for Ace Attorney, but the main issue there was the prospect of reach. I don't have hundreds of thousands of YouTube subscribers to spread a poll around, so I had no certainty that, even if I did make a poll, that anyone would really care. However, fast forward to the fall of 2025, and I had not only amassed like a few hundred followers on an Ace Attorney-centric Twitter account, and Shafe had recently released his Zelda poll video, so I decided to say, what the hell, and just throw it out there. I had no clue whether or not it would get any traction, but I thought if I could get like 50 or so responses, I could make a semi-interesting Twitter thread about it or something. So I posted it to my account there, as well as Reddit and Tumblr, and waited for some responses. And, well, I was hoping for maybe 50 responses, and I ended up with over 3,000, which is just incredible, beyond my wildest expectations, and I want to thank each and every person who sent in their votes. All of this would not have been possible without you. As for what I want to do from here, I'm honestly not that sure. I'm considering running another poll, this time on Ace Attorney cases, mainly since the pool of responses is limited to just 50 or so and not the hundreds of possible characters one could pick from. I think that could be fun. I'm also thinking about having this specific poll be an annual tradition of sorts. Obviously I wouldn't be making a video of this scale every year, just maybe something that purely documents the results and doesn't have all this commentary on the characters themselves. For non-poll related content, I'm thinking maybe doing some ranking videos, particularly about the music of Ace Attorney, or not even just Ace Attorney. I want to make stuff for like Deltarune and Zero Escape too. I know Schaffrillas released his full case ranking recently, so maybe it could be fun to make a reaction video to that, I don't know. Either way, I'm still planning on making more stuff, so maybe stick around for that or something. I don't know, I'm not your mom. And to finish things off, I decided to throw something fun here at the end. While I was tallying up the votes, I also kept track of the top 10 most popular characters from each game, and so I have a little montage here showing off all those rankings, along with some other categories like defense attorneys, assistants, prosecutors, culprits, and what have you. And so, that's all from me. For everyone that stuck around to the very end, I want to sincerely thank you with all of my heart for watching this. This is the biggest project I've ever done for anything, really, and it's great knowing that people decided to give it the time of day and got some enjoyment out of it. Again, thank you so much, and I hope life is treating you well. See ya.